town of the good, the bad, and the weird. You either live by the gun, or you die by the sword.
And so, the good, the bad, and the weird spoke unto the listeners their one and only commandment. You shall have no other podcast before us. Welcome to the Good, the Bad, and the Weird podcast. I'm Nico.
And I'm Chris. It is that time of year.
Yeah.
The Passover quickly approaches, and the annual tradition of turning on the television and watching the 4-hour spectacular of the Ten Commandments is once again here.
Yeah, and not only that, for the conclusion of Season 5, we kind of decided to do a little bit of a dive into Judeo-Christian religious movies. Unintentionally planning 4 of them when we only thought we were doing maybe 3.
Yeah, well, you know, it happens.
Yeah. We kind of hinted at this here and there. Something we kind of have wanted to explore in the past previously in contrast to, like, the folk horror and the other religiously related movies we've explored.
Very true. And this is a huge section of the film industry, especially nowadays. We're starting with...
I don't know. I'd say it's large in a certain sect.
Yes. That sect, though, is surprisingly big.
Oh, yeah.
So, like, I know you are outside of this.
Mm-hmm.
I am no longer a, avid watcher of these sorts of movies, but I used to be, and I still have friends who are. And we have moved as a film, congregation from having, little short silent films all the way into having, if there is a thing you can think of, there is a huge genre to go with it.
Yeah, I know I've stumbled upon a Harry Potter spin-off that's a Judeo-Christian, or not Judeo-Christian, just a Christian movie.
Just Christian version. Yeah, no, so, I specifically wanted to start here, though, because I think for a lot of us, this was, the OG Bible on TV sort of movie, and it played every year for many, many years, and I think it is still on TV every year around Easter and Passover time. And this predates the whole networking thing, which we will talk about at a later date in a different podcast. But this is the core. This is the seed that started this idea of having this growth, this, I don't want to call it ministry through film, because it's not who it's for. It's for Christians by Christians, right?
Yeah, I don't know what you mean by networking, though.
So there is entire networks designated to only producing Christian films for Christians.
Like Pure Flix.
Similar. And it didn't used to be that way. It used to just be a genre kind of like Westerns, or like samurai films, or like noirs, right? And this movie is honestly the pinnacle of Christian historical dramas being a genre of film, not necessarily their own branded network.
Okay, I see what you're saying now.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I had never seen this movie until this year, actually. I've seen pieces of it throughout my life.
Honestly, pieces is the way to go. Pieces is the way to go. I definitely grew up watching, I was one of those kids, though, that, I didn't want to sit down and watch the whole movie unless it was my idea to watch it. So I have seen this whole movie every year. But I rarely sit and watch the whole movie every year. Because it's on TV, and it's usually on during, a family event. So it was nice to actually sit down and truly watch it as a movie, and not just as a background thing.
Yeah, you're right there, because, like I said, I'd seen pieces of it. But even then, I don't even remember if it was on AFN or not, and even then, I don't think my parents could have kept my attention for
this movie
4
is
hours.
So not for children.
Oh no, not
this
at all.
This movie is so boring, honestly.
Yeah.
But in a fun historical way, I don't know how to explain it.
Yeah. Well, I was actually surprised to learn that this was actually a remake of director Cecil B. DeMille's original 1923 version.
Yes.
Which, honestly, I did watch the original, and I like that it's kind of a little bit more abridged, that we get everything done in an hour, and then you can kind of turn it off and ignore the second half of the movie if you really want to.
Yeah, I agree, and I think this movie kind of flips it on the head. Most people watching this movie remember and want to watch the second half of this movie, and whereas the first half is honestly just very dry.
Yeah, but I do think it's cool that he was able to remake his own movie, too.
I do, too. Especially seeing how Cecil, this to him was his pinnacle. He was very proud of this movie. It was the last, this was the last thing he created. And he went to his grave being incredibly proud that this was the thing he had last made. He spent more time than I think anyone else researching. And like I say that heavily because we've talked about like Titanic.
Mm-hmm.
This man researched the ever-loving crap out of this film.
Oh yeah, and I mean it shows.
It really does.
They definitely took it seriously instead of like trying to make fun of it or make fun of like the Egyptians or make it just a dumbed down like, oh, look at us kind of movie.
Which is good. And Cecil's kind of known for this, and I'm really glad that like this is the film people remember him best by, because this movie came at kind of the tail end of a boom of Egyptian, especially historical and old Egyptian, being very popular. The research on it, films about it. Cleopatra was incredibly popular as like a character in both film and media and books. There was a lot of like tie over for all of these other actors who had been in all of these other films. Having a Egyptian setting even was like incredibly popular at this time. So the interest from the populace was there. Cecil's love of the genre. He had already directed several big Egyptian-based films, and on top of that, several, I'm going to call them historical dramas, because some of them are very, like, Bible-based, and some of them were just historical figure-based. But, like, these big epic dramas, these were two categories he already was very well known in. He'd already done some very good work in. And he brought those two together in, like, what he thought of as his, like, master opus.
Yeah. We're also kind of at the tail end of the Universal Monsters sagas. Like, mummies had kind of died out by this point.
True, and like...
to be fair, mummies weren't... The mummies are probably the worst of the Universal movies.
They are, but they are fun.
And specifically, I'm not shitting on the Brendan Fraser one, because I know people will fight you over that.
They will.
I'm talking about the 1932 to 1956 movie.
Yeah, the stiff arms slowly coming after you.
Yes, that mummy.
Yeah. The other thing was, like, there was a big boom in, like, an interest in very factual historical things, which was very heavily counterbalanced, because this came out in the 50s, like right in that mid-50s, 1956.
Yes.
So there was this very big interest from the populace in, like, deep historical facts. So, like, there was this big boom in understanding of, like, oh, the Egyptians painted everything. This is what the Romans looked like. This is what Pompeii looked like. There was this huge interest in what old world looked like, what the, 7 wonders of the ancient world were, what they probably looked like. However, it was very heavily balanced out with this very aggressive 1950s mindset.
Yeah, which we'll discuss a little bit.
And I think this movie does a great job of showing that. Because, boy, he knew what everything should have been, and, like, he also knew his audience, though. Or
what he was allowed to get away with for 1956.
Yes.
Which I'll bring up some of the historical context of why he couldn't do certain things. So, The Ten Commandments, written for screen by Anus Mackenzie, Jesse Lasky Jr., Jack Garris, and Cedric M. Frank, with materials from Prince of Egypt by Dorothy Clark Wilson, Pillar of Fire by J.H. Ingram, and On Eagle's Wing by A.E. Southern.
And if you watch the movie to its very final end, the Bible.
Yeah. As we said, directed by Cecil B. DeMille, stars Charlton Heston, Yul Brynner, who is the one who actually got us into The Magic Christian for our mic review.
Yes.
Ann Baxter and Yvonne DeCarlo. But I do also want to point out from the get-go, and be very open about this. I'm not religious. You're not a religious person. And I bring this up because I don't want people to think we're covering this topic in a cynical and trying to be like a derogatory towards it.
No.
We're looking at these films, and this goes for this entire section, more of a scholarly approach of cinema of the movies. Not biblical scholarly either. I mean, that's to be fair. And I do only bring this up because I know this is a touchy matter for some people. Yes,
and it is also something to be recognized that Cecil had a very specific version of the Bible that he thought was the version of the Bible. It is the version that he quotes regularly throughout the movie. Like, when you hear the narrator voice, that is Cecil speaking. That's him reading directly from his Bible. And it was his Bible. Like, he brought his own 1-2 set to read out of. I believe it's the King James version, but don't quote me on that because, honestly, it doesn't matter. In the end, he did have a second person whose entire job was to try and help fill in the blanks that he, over his very long career of doing historical and biblical movies, had not filled in about Moses' time period in the Bible.
Mm-hmm.
So, like, this, from a Christian biblical standpoint, was researched incredibly heavily. Now, we have changed that definition over the years. It's something that when I was, like, very much involved in the church and with my friends who were, this was, like, the hot topic of the time, was the way research for these sorts of films has changed. The research that was done was separated. There was Egyptology and set history, and then there was the biblical characters' history.
Mm-hmm.
There is some overlapping, and I do think that the commentary that comes on the, like, specialty DVD that we watched is very good. She does a great job of explaining where that overlap is and what their thought process was for it. However, if you're going to be looking at this movie from a nowadays, like, Christian-based research, it doesn't hold as much water because there is not that, like, overlap that we now look for, we now use a lot. But at the time, this was, like, considered an incredibly detailed and researched, and it still is. Like, there's still a lot that holds true, and a lot of the editing that changed was done specifically to fit a 1950s audience.
Yeah, and that commentary you were speaking of is by Catherine Orson, author of Written in Stone, Making Cecil B. DeMille's Epic, The Ten Commandments, which unfortunately I wasn't able to get a copy of in time, which I would say quite good commentary on the film history in general.
It is.
Which I didn't realize that at the time it was difficult to even make a biblical epic, so people were kind of thinking that DeMille was a little bit crazy for doing this.
Yeah, his like, most famous works were historical epics, and he had done a few biblical epics, but they were done in the style of, like, the old Hercules films.
Mm-hmm.
I think at the time his most popular one was Samson and Delilah, which was mostly shown as, like, an interesting story, as opposed to this, which was shown as, like, most accurate retelling of a Bible tale.
It's what Braveheart wishes it was.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah. So, before we really get into it, and despite us not being religious, I've watched and I know you've watched quite a few religious movies, and I figured kind of a way to break them down into 5 categories.
Okay.
And this might apply to other religious movies, but I still think it's interesting. The first category being historical biblical epics, which we're covering right now.
Yes.
Think Ben-Hur, The Ten Commandments, or more contemporary films like even the animated film The Prince of Egypt.
Honestly, that and this gets compared a lot because they're both considered, like, high epics.
Yeah, Noah, or less epic, but his only son.
Yeah, it's still epic.
Even technically I'd consider the musical Journey to Bethlehem to fall under that a little.
I can see it, however, there is an entire genre of Christian musicals, so, like, you know. Maybe.
Yeah, that one's the one that I had a little bit of difficulty categorizing. But the second just being religious stories, something that might sound basic, but there is a fine line between that and what the third category is going to be.
Sure.
An example being On the Wing of a Prayer, where a movie where faith is an important theme,
sure,
but it doesn't make you feel guilty for not believing in it, much like our third category, the evangelical films, also referred to as Christploitation films.
Yeah.
Heavy-handed movies about faith that are meant to deliver a message that reinstates the faith of certain sects of the devout, while making non-religious viewers, or trying to make non-religious viewers feel guilty for not converting to it.
Yeah.
Think God's Not Dead, Let There Be Light, technically even the Left Behind series.
No, 100% the Left Behind series.
More recently, the Nefarious movie that was trying to market itself as a horror film, but you get 2 minutes into it, and it's like, oh, you guys are a little heavy. Think propagandic. That's what the type of movies those are.
Yeah, and these are mostly the ones that are stirring a pot intentionally. We see them a lot being talked about in mass media because that's their goal, is to just kind of, like, stir up stuff. Granted, like, I understand the Left Behind series based off the books, which were just heavily popular. However, you cannot look me dead in the eyes and tell me that the director did not want that movie poster plastered everywhere across the news.
No. I mean, I only know Left Behind because you got me that for, that actually started off the Nick Cage collection.
Yes, it sure did.
And Hercules is starting his own movie of it, so of course I'm going to watch it to see how dumb it goes.
Yeah.
But the fourth category falls into more of the art house realm.
Mm-hmm.
Think more contemplative films that explore faith rather than become sermons. They're
sure.
They don't always give you an exact answer. It's kind of like Guillermo del Toro films where it's what you take from it. So examples being the very classic The Seventh Seal, Wings of Desire, and pretty much on anything Andrei Tarkovsky's done.
Sure.
Like Stalker.
Yeah. I would argue that there is one last category, and I know you're not super familiar with it.
Okay.
But I am. and I have slowly been introducing it to you, but you didn't realize it yet.
What's that?
And it is the love category.
Hmm.
So I had you watch stupid Hallmark Christmas films.
Yeah.
This is the sister category to the dumb romance films.
I actually have that written into our next micro.
I knew it.
The Christploitation films have a heavy tie into.
They do.
But also, a lot of the religious stories have ties into, like, Christmassy, Hallmarky movies where
Yes.
you know where it's going.
Yes. The only reason that I argue that, because I do think that, like, the children's films and even the silly musicals can be put into one of these other categories with, you know, maybe a little bit of stretching and bending, but honestly, like, you know, if musicals, why not? The only reason I argue for the romance category to be its own separate one is because the topic in the faith portion is so hyper-specific there that it does cover, like, its own problems, its own religious persona, and they are specifically marketed towards a very specific audience who, honestly, usually don't watch all these other versions.
It's like Christian Mingle butt movies, then.
Yeah, honestly, it's Hallmark, but
it's
Christian.
See, I haven't come across those yet. So.
We will watch the firefighter one together. I cackle every time, and not because it's necessarily all bad. It's like the same cackle that I do for Twilight, where, like, the romance portion does not work. However, the characters are actually fairly decent. The writing for how, like, limited the budget was actually kind of impressive. Like, it has its good points, but boy, that romance is stiff.
I was actually talking to my brother this weekend over, he and his girlfriend watched, 50 Shades of Grey, and then they also had watched the Twilight movies recently, too, so.
Yeah, putting all of them together, it does feel right. And the Twilight ones especially, because as we all know, the Twilight ones are just vampire Mormon, like, fan fiction.
Yeah.
And so, like, they do have similar, like, silly vibes. So that is my only caveat. I do think that is the only category that I would argue you have missed. Other than that, yeah, I think you got it.
So, technically now we have 6 categories. The last category is something you and I have discussed outside of the podcast a lot of times.
We have.
And that being films that are technically religious, but some would argue they are not, particularly because it's not the brighter side or the happier side.
Sure.
Examples being The Exorcist, The Omen, Rosemary's Baby, The
Yes.
Rite, Exorcism of Emily Rose. List goes on, but I mean, I think you, the audience, get the pattern of what I'm trying to get there is they're technically about religion.
But, like, not really. It's usually some ghost.
Kind of.
Yeah.
Or the devil.
But honestly, like, it feels almost like an extension of fantasy as opposed to based in, like, a serious religious topic.
I know people who don't watch them because they believe in it.
I do too.
Yeah.
In fact, I went to school with people who would not let me watch films because they thought they were real.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, before we get into the 10 Commandments, what are we drinking today, Chris?
Well, it is mentioned but never shown because Cecil was very careful to make sure that this film could be watched by a very young audience. So, as mentioned, we are having honeyed wine.
Yeah. Well, mead.
Mead. Well, it's a local brewery, so hopefully this is very good.
Angry Earl.
Delightful.
Which I thought the name fit.
Ooh, I like it.
That's very good.
A little spicy, a little sweet. Like it.
Yeah. I am a little annoyed with Cecil, you bring Cecil B. DeMille up, but, like, the Harvest Moon games have done the same thing. They've removed alcohol, and it annoys me a bit.
Yeah. Cecil was incredibly careful because from the get-go, from the day he decided that this was going to be something he created, he wanted this to be a family event.
It kind of makes me think of, like, my parents letting me watch Braveheart, but closing my eyes for the titty scene, but I could watch the throat get slit open.
Yeah, there's a Cecil did not want to shy away from the reality and the harshness of ancient Egypt and the slavery that this movie was going to portray, but he did want it to be gentle enough that a 1950s family could comfortably get away with watching this all together. Yeah. And I do think he succeeded in that.
No, I completely agree. I mean, they can watch it because, let's be honest, this movie starts off with a very long overture to an introduction, which quite a lavish overture and backgrounds. Pretty. Wait,
we accidentally did this. Our next big one also does this, but in a jokey way. I love a movie with an overture and an intermission.
I know you do, but holy shit. Okay.
Because the second the movie starts playing, I realize I need a little snack and I need to use the bathroom.
Yeah. Okay.
So this is perfect. I don't even have to turn the movie off.
Yeah, it's perfect for you because as it talks about, it's a story of birth and freedom, it quickly goes on to like, will we be ruled by the whims of a dictator or the rules of God? Which very, very interesting way to put it. Kind of like how when they were trying to either invest in public transit or cars, they said we can either invest in a road system or we can subsidize public transit.
Sure.
But to your point, the title card does not appear until 4.5 minutes in.
Yes, it does.
And then we get a little bit of, like, a little statement of DeMille took a pilgrimage to the grounds that Moses trod 3,000 years ago. And then, before the movie even starts, to get to...
There's not even things on screen yet. There's just a title card.
Well, it's background and people talk, like, their names and stuff, the credits.
Yes, yeah.
But it takes 8.5 minutes to finally get to the movie.
Yes. And while we never can 100% confirm, because he wasn't told directly that this is how it was going to be, it was implied from the beginning that he wanted this to run unedited on TV. And so while I do think for a DVD setting, it is a little annoying, and I would have preferred having 2 cuts of the movie, one without the intermission and one and overture and one with, for a TV viewing, this is brilliant, because honestly, this would come on, and that 8.5 minutes was normally used in our house as a scrambling session for everyone to get their snacks, everyone get their second slice of pie, the kids to find the last of their Easter candy, because we usually watched this after we had our Easter egg hunt. And, like, we were watching this at either my parents' house or my grandparents' house, both of which had kind of an elaborate setup to get the TV started, because there's so many remotes back in the day. So, like, why I understand how nowadays it's not necessary, when it's on TV, it's brilliant.
Yeah, well, I get that too, but also, like, even if there was a version without those intermissions, it's still like a 3.5 hour movie.
Oh, it's still a hella long movie. Like, the DVD is split into 2 DVDs. That's how long this stupid movie is.
Yeah. But when we do finally get into it, we get a bit of scripture and quite dynamic and cool shots and quick setup of Moses and his lot in life, as well as his destiny. I mean, immediately different than the other epics we've previously talked about or seen. There's immediately foreshadowing, partially because it's such an old tale, everyone knows where it's going.
Of course. I also am glad you brought up the foreshadowing that happens from the very beginning. Because while we are listening to 8.5 minutes of essentially nothing and some backstory, the orchestra music is playing the whole time, and it is starting to introduce the themes of all of the characters as their names either appear on screen or it's playing Moses' main theme. And this is very important because this movie is crazy long, but the music is very well done. Yeah,
and I'm too musically stupid to... I know I was told that people had themes. I could not distinguish them.
I know you couldn't. I've watched this movie so many times that I have them all memorized. But the score was done by Elmer Bernstein, and he was a newcomer to the Cecil gang. Cecil had like a cast of people that he liked working with. He liked rehiring the same people over and over again throughout their entire careers, whether that be editors, lighting, and especially film and score and musicians. Bernstein was a newcomer because his predecessor, who had done almost all of Cecil's previous like big works outside of the silent film era, he was at the end of his life and had declined working on this film for health reasons and had recommended Bernstein, and Bernstein went over the top to try and impress Cecil. And he used these themes very intentionally to depict not only like which character is which I do appreciate, because some of the characters, because we have a lot of costume changes, it can be a little tricky to keep track of who's who, especially the side characters. There's a lot of wig changes for the ladies.
I can see from your standpoint, but...
I have a lot of trouble, but the music helps a lot. But also he used it to make it very clear who in the script was meant to, from an early beginning, be a good guy versus a bad guy. And it works very well.
Oh, yeah. Well, I mean, if I could hear it, I probably would think so, too.
I know.
But one thing going into this movie is it's very different compared to the other historical dramas or historical epics that we've covered, like Gladiator, Braveheart. This one is very stage-like in its approach because they weren't planning to make something technically advanced. No. They just wanted to make a faithful movie, which I appreciate all the attempts and especially knowing the background, the considerations they took in trying to reproduce the costuming, the dances, and everything they could. They
spent so much time trying to make sure this was as historically accurate as they could without bringing attention to those details.
Yes. And specifically, we are aware that it's a bunch of white people playing Egyptians.
With the exception of some background people who were actually Egyptians.
This movie is from the 50s.
It sure is.
And quite a few people had to wear contacts to hide their blue eyes.
Yep.
But I do want to remind people, and I'll bring this up a little bit later because it ties into another aspect of the movie.
Yeah.
Stuff like interracial marriage was still illegal in much of the United States South.
And Cecil was very sensitive to this. When we say that he didn't show any drinking, there's very little blood in honestly what is a rather gory story.
Mm-hmm.
There's a very sensitive look on death on both the good and bad side of the coin.
Wish they had a weird side of the dice.
Yeah, well, there's no dice in ancient Egypt. There's sticks.
Yeah.
But Cecil wanted to handle this as maturely and sensitively for his audience as he could. He knew that this was going to be a problem if he used a lot of non-conventionally attractive actors, which is why he got very lucky with who he found to play Ramses. Yule was one of the few actors who was willing to shave his head, and he had just come off of King and I, which was been a wildly successful musical at the time. It is a little racially insensitive. You're right. It's the 1950s.
Yeah.
But people at the time really liked it, and they received him very well. So Cecil got very lucky that he was able to work with him. Almost everyone else in this film had worked with Cecil previously, and Cecil prided himself on bringing people that he knew back to work with him.
But he was also careful in choosing who he put in the forefront, because all the main characters aren't from the Egyptian, which he also directed in 1954.
Yes.
But some of the background characters are from the Egyptian because he liked working with them.
And he did try to take looks into some consideration. Like you said, there was a lot of contacts being worn, which they are not the modern contacts. These ones were very uncomfortable to wear.
Mm-hmm.
Almost everyone in this was forced to wear a wig. There was a handful of especially at the beginning half of the movie, Egyptian-based men he did insist on having some of the more traditional hairstyles for the men and some of the more traditional wig styles for the women as best as he could. But, again, he knew that his audience in the 1950s would not be a big fan.
Yeah, specifically Charlton Heston, he didn't shave his head because he knew you have a leading man, he has to have hair. This is way before Picard, so bald wasn't really the handsome thing, but he still had the prince's knot.
Yes, and he also did his best to try and base a lot of the looks of his actors off of some historical evidence. However, his historical evidence is like Michelangelo, who is famous for whitewashing, because it's the Renaissance period. And they were free to finally paint whatever the hell they wanted as long as the church said yes. So,
it's Europe. They're going to paint white people.
They're going to paint white people. So while he does have, a lot of historical basis for who he picked where, it is, especially nowadays, blaringly obvious that this movie is a little leaning onto one side.
Yeah,
but it does attempt to do it well. It's just the 1950s.
Yeah. And like you said, not very gory. It goes into the killing of the firstborn, Moses floating down the river and being found by the princess. And I like some of the naivety in their filmmaking.
Yeah.
Because they were so used to, being able to hide safety pins in these historical things. The baby has a safety pin.
And it's blaringly front and center. Yeah. And apparently when this movie came out, a lot of letters came in saying, we saw your movie, very good job on the historical accuracy, but we caught that safety pin. Which really does go to show how popular historical, literacy was at the time. People were very into the whole Egyptian thing at the time.
Yeah, it plays into a lot of the classic Shakespeare of ooh, you get an omen, so you try and avoid the omen, but you end up causing the omen or causing the consequences of the omen.
Yes. I do appreciate also that this baby was a real baby. For almost every scene we see baby. Baby is the real baby. Mm-hmm. And this is the only thing baby is in. This was the role he was literally born to play, is how it's title card. So that's so cute. They were very pleased with Baby, apparently, which, as we talked about with our last one with the Jim Henson movie, babies are famously hard to work with. Apparently, Cecil did not have this problem with this baby.
Yeah, so our leopard's named Baby.
That's true. That leopard that baby could have eaten those people.
Yeah.
Maybe tried to eat those people.
Well, we covered it.
We did.
Check out that episode and bring up Baby. But in this part, I do think it's a good way of showing the dynamics of like where everything's at. There's the slave who's also her maid, but also so devoted. She's in a, there's a lot of, I don't know if there's a specific, Judas characters. Judas kind of, but more like Uncle, it's the Jewish version of Uncle Tom, I guess.
No, it's very Uncle Tommy, Tom-E. But I do also appreciate how much work Cecil put into the set, like from the very beginning. This is a beautiful setting. It is much more elaborate and much more detailed than most Egyptian-based movies were at the time, especially an ancient Egypt-styled movie. A lot of them relied rather heavily on, like, short scenes, so, like, a very short set that you had some setting. He went full out. He even insisted on having pieces painted. He didn't want it too painted because he was trying to do this in Technicolor, and he was worried about the colors popping wrong. But, like, this is a beautiful set.
Yeah, and you can see the inklings of what he was trying to go for in the original Ten Commandments as well. At least the first half, not the second half about the brothers.
Yeah.
But also what I like, at least initially, because, let's be honest, this movie, we don't really get to the second half until, like, 2 hours into the movie.
No, it's very long.
But after the opening credits, we get that little bit, and then we are flash forward to years later, where Moses is successful, fully grown. His blue swaddling has now become his blue armor.
Yeah.
And we're also getting the setup for Ramses' jealousy and the Pharaoh's goal of successions through actions and not birth, which really good job of setting up the Pharaoh to be kind of a good guy, but not like, for his people, he's a good guy is what he is. But he's like, he might be a slave owner, but he believes in succession through action, not through birthright.
Yes. And the amount of, and this is where I think the other historical dramas that we've talked about failed. They spent so much time proving to you that they had done their history research that it honestly hurt it, because when they got something wrong, it was blaringly obvious.
Yeah,
this one
at Braveheart.
Oh, looking directly at Braveheart. This one, there is so much subtle history nods that are never talked about. They are never, like, brought up. They are not even given names. They are just part of the set, part of these people, the actors' like supposed world that they needed to embody. Cecil asked all of his actors to become proficient in whatever their character was doing. So if you were riding a chariot, you needed to learn to be comfortable on a chariot, if not drive that chariot. He asked his actors to actually learn to play the ancient game of Egyptian chess. I can't remember its actual name.
I don't remember.
But, like, they actually learned to play and were playing on set. Like, if your character needed to learn to weave, you learned to weave. Again, and it shows.
All the little details that just went into this movie. Like, just not just the sets and costuming that we've been ranting about, but the intentful writing. And, like, this is one of those movies where, at least in the main cast, and even then, like, even with the side cast, the dialogue never feels dull or pointless.
No, everything feels very, and not even just story-driven, character-driven. Everything feels very natural. Even the bad CGI, or I guess I shouldn't say CGI, the blue screening. Because this was all done on blue screen for, like, the depth shots, but, like,
still
looks good.
For 1956, we're nowhere near Alien. We're nowhere near Star Wars. Like,
and on something to also remember is Cecil originally got his start in the silent film era.
Yeah.
His, like, bread and butter was not even blue screen. To him, that was, like, fairly advanced technology. He knew that by the time this came out, there was fancier ways to do something, but he wasn't quite comfortable with it. He wasn't sure that he was going to get the result he wanted, so he worked with what he knew would work. Yeah,
this is a guy who grew up, who cut his teeth in the same era as, like, George Méliès, who, like, one of the grandfather of special effects.
Yes. A lot of people consider Cecil to be one of the founding fathers of American cinema. He also got his, because of how many epic dramas that he did, and how well known he was, because he was not a director who, at the time, directors they did not see themselves as being the celebrities that a lot of directors now see themselves as. Cecil was one of the few who was visibly in the public. He was in his own movies, he was on TV, and he was a radio announcer and host, and a very famous one. So people knew his voice, and they knew what he looked like.
Yeah, we also should mention he narrates this movie when we have a narrator.
Yes. And so this amount of detail is the equivalent of, like, Hitchcock coming out with a movie, and it's the level of detail is Titanic. Like, this was a big to-do, so having the amount of attention to detail in, like, how the necklaces were made, in what type of fabric and clothing that the, like, women wore, which for the 1950s would have been scandalous, because the ancient Egyptians were very into sheer.
I did enjoy the costuming.
I did too, but also I was impressed with how, like, elegantly he handled it. It was never shown off in, like, a sexy way. It's just what they're wearing.
It's no, what was the sorceress or the king's concubine or the pharaoh's concubine in The Mummy?
Yes, no, it's not, because that one was meant to shock you into how beautiful she was. These ones, you're expected to know she's beautiful because she is the pharaoh's or the potential pharaoh's interest in love. Yeah. Or she is in the palace. But, like, the outfit itself is not what's making her beautiful.
No. She's a gorgeous woman. Let's get to her. Nefertiri, we are introduced as she's cheering on Moses, which begins our little love subplot that...
I like the little subplot.
Yeah, because while it doesn't, like, really go in the way, like, we know where it's gonna go.
Sure. I mean, this is a story that we already know the ending to.
Yeah, and even, like, the little love plots here and there they're not really fulfilling, but they're important elements in the movie.
They give the characters some more depth than just having them, like, be the pharaoh or be Moses.
Because Nefertiri at this point is, like, all the women in this movie are property.
Yes. And it's blatantly so. Like, there was a 15-year period where there's a line in this movie, I think close to this point, where Ramses says to Nefertiri, "I will love you like I love my dog or my horse."
Yeah, it's a bit later on.
A little, but it, like, that attitude, and even Moses during his, like, reign in the palace is meant to have that attitude, right? Because that was, according to Cecil in the history that he did, that is how the attitude would have been. And so I appreciate that he went ahead and left it. Granted, when it hit TV, that like, there are a few scenes like that were cut during about a 15-year period. I believe they're back on air. I remember that line being on air when I was a kid. I don't know if it's still... I'm sure it's still on air since it's been brought back, but, like, I don't know.
No, I mean, it's
at least on the DVD.
But it's a good part in it, too, because it shows how horrible Ramses is compared to Moses.
Yes, because even though Moses is living those ideals, like, they show him being a little bit reckless. They show him being, like, he cares about the people. He would like to do his best, but he is very much embodying the culture that he lives in at this point in the movie. And I appreciate that they aren't showing him as, like, this perfect person, right? Like, this is a growth and adventure for the character, not just a biblical retelling. Yeah.
Well, Nefertiri was almost played by Audrey Hepburn, speaking of figures and the costuming. But as we talked about in our Breakfast at Tiffany's episode, while Audrey Hepburn, very beautiful, was very flat-footed and very stick-shaped.
Yeah, she was a bit flat, and Cecil was worried that the very sheer outfit, which was already going to be scandalous...
No, they already said it didn't sit well on her at all, because it was like she was wearing a drape.
Yeah, and it was very important for Cecil that the outfits and the props look as close to historically accurate as he could make them.
And you needed curves.
Granted, there's now... I did some reading from some more recent research articles. There's a little bit of back and forth on whether or not wigs and the hairstyling, and especially the makeup, which he did leave out intentionally, because as we know, like, Egyptians were very famous for having big eyes on both men and women with the eye makeup. He left that out because he was worried 1950s it wouldn't sit well with people.
Yeah, shaved because of lice and...
Yeah, and all that sort of stuff. So there's a lot of, like, more recent research that I was seeing from people who were like, well, probably the wig would have looked a little bit different. There probably was a little bit more, like, jewelry here or there. But for what we can tell, what we can see, and what was shaved down for a 1950s audience, he still went pretty big and pretty bold. Like, it's clearly a sheer dress.
Yes, it is.
But it's done very tactfully. Like, it is, and it's not done in what I think the normal 1950s way of handling would have been, which would have been to either have her skirting around the camera so that you're never getting a full front shot, or having things placed in the way, or having it very clear that she has a slip or something else on underneath. He does it very cleverly where it is implied that this is exactly what she is wearing. There was a little bit of trickery with underwear to make it so that no nipples, no lady bits were shown, but it's done in such a way that it's not overly shown off to be like, look, we are being good.
Yeah.
So, like, for a lot of people, they spent a lot of their youth in the Easter times hoping to see a titty.
It's like my dad, one of my earliest memories with my dad and watching Star Wars The Empire Strikes Back, where
Exactly.
with the green chick falling in the pit.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah. But we are on to the throne room, and we have the return of Moses. Again, the set is lavish, but not too lavish like we would see in, like, The Mummy.
Yeah.
We're probably going to reference The Mummy a lot because it's our most close tie to it.
Yeah, I think that this is done also in... Cecil was most comfortable with a more stage-like approach to movie making, and while he definitely branched out much later throughout his career, like, this is the end of his career, he had lots of experience with different film techniques and stylings of the stages and sets. He was very comfortable with that. I do think in the palace, it is most stage-like, and I argue that it works best because this is meant to be like a parade of the characters,
yes.
right?
No, exactly. Which also, side note, all the sets were done by the Lucky brothers who destroyed them afterwards, so they couldn't be reused.
Which, there's been some controversy on whether or not that was like an intentional good idea or not. There was a lot of props from this movie that were not destroyed, and they were kept as like prized possessions by actors for their entire lives.
Yeah, but the sets themselves were taken away. Speaking of the parade, they were having this because Moses conquered Ethiopia, and we're introduced to the envoys of it.
Yeah, the you know,
envoy, yeah.
the sprinklings of how it's meant to show off exactly how much wealth and power the pharaoh and the pharaoh's sons has at this time, and I do think they succeed to an extent,
and getting more so because of their conquest.
And I would argue that this, in context with what the rest of film looked like at the time, especially knowing that The King and I had just come out, and while that movie has I would argue, less emphasis on anything historical, it has a very similar parade setting at the beginning to show off all of the children to the new teacher, and also the wealth and the display of the palace grounds. The similarities to that are very obvious, and I think that cultural context works because it makes it much easier to digest, like, what exactly you're looking at, because we get hit with so much stuff so quickly. There are rugs, there are skins, there is birds, there, like, apparently there was meant to be leopards and, like, cheetahs, but they had to cut them out because there were actually live birds, and the cheetahs were not into that. Yeah. Which, I don't blame them. They're a giant cat. Can you imagine Hobbs trying to walk down with all of this stuff? She would lose her mind.
No, I actually had a bird get in once, and Hobbs was terrified.
That tracks.
Yeah, Hobbs isn't very good.
No,
she's
Hobbs,
not a good cat.
But she's very cute.
Yes.
She's shaped like a squishmallow.
Yeah. But there's a little bit in this parading of the goods where one of the female envoys, or I can't remember, she might be the princess of Ethiopia. Nefertiti gives her like this really jealous look, and it's a
dirty look.
Yeah. It's DeMille's nod to an interpretation of a line in the Bible that Moses' wife, Zephora, was a Cushite woman who could have potentially been black because that group of people was from Ethiopia. Something that DeMille said he couldn't depict, but he would have at the time because it was too advanced for the 50s. Again, interracial marriage would still be illegal for much of the U.S. for another 11 years.
Yeah, like he knew that there was going to be a lot of things in this movie that were not just the drinking, not just blood, that he wanted to include some way, acknowledge in some way, but he knew he wouldn't get away with actually showing. The other portion to that same, like, portion of the movie was he fully was aware that, according to the research he had done, Moses had several wives, this lady being one of them. However, again, 1950s, that would not have stood, let alone the color of her skin. Multiple wives, all at the same time, technically never divorced, would not have flown. So having this portion and then having the romance not go as far as his research says that it did, helps kind of polish through, so that way our Moses ends up very similar to what the 1950s ideal image of him should be.
And it allows us to move on real quickly as a modern audience to really understanding the drives between Ramses and Moses, because Ramses is driven by the fears of the past and the wounds, because they're still afraid of the what do they call Moses' care? What Moses, the deliverer?
Yes.
Whereas Moses, they were talking, the city's not going well, but Moses is searching, trying to figure out why things are not going well, trying to solve the problem instead of like, it's they're not doing their job. Well, why aren't they doing their job?
Yeah, it's very much trying to show two different dynamics of what a king could be, whether it is proactive or reactive.
Mm-hmm.
And I do think they do it rather successfully, because at this point in the movie, while Ramses is being built up to you be able to look back and say, oh, this is why he made these terrible choices. This is why he was so cruel. At this point, he's not cruel. He's just still scared of the past.
Well, and Ramses is also definitely that spoiled child who...
Oh, 100%. But one could argue that Moses is also the spoiled child. I do argue, though, that this version of Moses is the less spoiled version of Moses out of the, main big Moses movies, especially Prince of Egypt. I think they do that better there. And
I think it's because the way Ramses feels like he deserves this, because he is the true son of the Pharaoh, whereas Moses is... Moses knows he's the adopted child, so there's kind of a little thing of him having to prove that he really is a good son kind of bit.
And I think Cecil does a fantastic job of having this balance be up in the front, have that dynamic be something that the audience is forced to deal with without it being hand-fed to you like a baby bird. I think it's done so sensitively and so well, and part of that is because Cecil had mentioned that he is an adoptive parent, and it was a topic very close and dear to his heart. He wanted this to be done in a very sensitive but forward way. He didn't want it to be swept under the rug. He wanted this to be something that, if you were going to break down his movie, he wanted this to be a topic of discussion.
Oh, yeah. Well, even in, the love triangle between Nefertiri, Moses, and Ramses... There's that line that Nefertiri says that, but I am Egypt. And that's because it's not just they want to marry her because, she's the daughter. She is the one that will give them the power to be. But Moses actually loves her, whereas Ramses sees her as a goal, an object to be conquered, basically.
Exactly.
Even though he's not even doing a good job at his first task.
No, but I do think that all of the conquests, the skills, the talents, and the jobs that they give Ramses and Moses almost as background bits for the rest of the dialogue from here forward until we get to the slave quarters scenes. I think they do add character to them and add something to build on. It gives them more dimension than if we were just aha, fantastic, now on to the next part.
It's much more interesting compared to the first Ten Commandments, where it's just and Moses let the people free, and then the Red Sea parted, and then the 10 Commandments were made. Nice abridging, but it still takes an hour to get through.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. But from here we're on to Goshen. Cool shots from a technical standpoint, because the perspective of all this, a good parts of this movie were filmed in Egypt.
Yeah.
But it's not the background, and then they kind of what they were trying to do with Seven Brides for Seven Brothers.
Yeah.
Instead, the foreground is in Egypt, the people on the background, and then there's a miniature that's behind all of that.
And they flip where the Egyptian, where the shots in Egypt are. They go from being foreground, there's a few that are actually middle/distant ground, there's a few that are the background scene to windows, and it's sprinkled in throughout almost the entire first half of this movie, which really helps add to this idea that they are in Egypt. Even the scenes that we know from listening to the commentary that they were on a set, it's 50 degrees and everyone was freezing, you are convinced that they are in 100-degree heat.
Yeah, specifically the mud pits.
But that one's the most obvious.
Also, it's good at setting up the Jewish people initially, where we still don't really see too much about them, but we understand it's harsh conditions. Some of them are artisans, but they are still slaves. We do get a little bit of a love story between Joshua and Lillian and Dathan, which...
I appreciate that there's an attempt at building these very side characters up a little bit, especially the first half of the movie, because it is a very long first half, and we don't really get to enjoy them as characters until the second half.
Yeah, and even then, their purpose is to help drive Moses.
Yes, I mean, he is the main character.
Yeah, they're another catalyst in another trial set forth before him for him to overcome, basically, or they're part of his trial.
But I think having them have, even if it feels like a little bit of a waste of time, even if it doesn't really feel like it's driving the story at all, I do think it helps give you a face to put to the idea of the Hebrew people. Because once we get to, let my people go, it is very nice to have, some identity in the crowd. Because, they're in a lot of the crowd scenes. So it's very nice to be able to point to people and be oh, there's a few faces I know.
And it's a side character I actually care a little bit about.
Exactly.
Even if it's just a little. We also get the building of the dynamic of the builders. Ramses is really delegating his work to Dathan. Which he's not even searching for the deliverer.
No. He's really not.
And amidst all this, an old woman is almost crushed by the stone, which is Yoshiba, who we saw release Moses early on.
That's his mom. His, OG mom.
And it's good starting to drive the action a little bit and kind of a potential small uprising.
I also appreciate that this scene was filmed in a very serious way with the almost crushing of Yoshiba? Yeah, that's it. Because, first off, the actress was very scared in this scene. Like, she legitimately was worried that she was going to be crushed a little bit, because they had a tractor behind the block to help give the actor something to pull and push against, and that tractor driver could not see her, unfortunately. This is a little dangerous here.
Yeah. Even a little girl on set thought it was real.
Yeah. So, I appreciate the amount of... It's not just intense for intensity's sake. It is giving a reality and a seriousness to the situation the Hebrews are in. But it's done in such a way that, as a kid, I watched this scene and I had no worries. I was not coming away from this with, upset and questions. And I think that was Cecil's goal. He wanted the adults to understand the seriousness of this problem, but the kids didn't need to have that thought yet.
Yeah, it's classically dramatic is what it is. Which, it is a little bit jarring seeing Vincent Price.
Yeah, it is.
As, the master driver or whatever his role is.
I will say that the makeup and the outfit does help camouflage him a little, but once you see it, it's hard to unsee.
Oh, no, you can tell in his voice right away, too.
That's right, yeah.
But, it also has good lines, too, of, blood makes poor mortar.
Yeah, there's some good lines in this.
Yeah. But also this scene is good in starting to show where Moses is, not necessarily where his alliance lies, and that he's for the Jewish people.
I think Ramses thinks that way. Moses is just thinking people are getting hurt.
Yeah, no, that's exactly what it is that he's a leader of the people, and...
And it's really starting to show the division between how Ramses behaves and how Moses behaves.
Moses against the system, but also kind of the starter of his own system, kind of like an OG punk.
Yeah, I appreciate that, because some of the other versions of... Because this is not the first time, and even, Cecil's own retelling, that is by far not the first time that Moses has been on the big screen. This is a very popular story. It's been on the screen several times. But most of them show a very quick depiction of, Ramsey bad, Moses good. I really like that Cecil takes almost 2 hours to explain to you why Moses good.
Yeah, no, it drives Moses as a whole. It
really does, and it makes him a very real character.
Yeah.
There is something rather interesting, though. In Cecil's research, he had come across in his reading and understanding of the text of the Bible, and specifically his version of the Bible, that their translation, I believe, I think it's the King James version that Cecil was using, claims that Moses was a poor speaker, and it gets interpreted as Moses had a bit of a lisp or a stutter.
Yeah, and he's not British, so his lisp doesn't sound cool, probably.
No, it does not. Cecil's own research, and then also the research of his historian, came up with that there is a good chance, according to them, again, I am not the historian, I cannot verify these facts, I did not have time for that part of the reason was because Moses had popped hot coals in his mouth as part of, proving that he was not a threat to Pharaoh. There's a long story about, more about the prophecy and, why Moses was a threat to Ramses and, the Egyptian kingdom as a whole. But I appreciate that Cecil, first off, went, well, we really can't have my main man not speaking for, a majority of this film. He's already not bald, and that bothers me. So, we will have him speak.
Yeah. You have to make him speak for the leading man of a movie. You
do, especially this leading man. William was a fantastic actor. He wasn't a nobody. People knew him. He was one of the main two faces on the poster. People were coming to see him.
Who? William?
William. Was William Boyd, not Moses?
No, Charles.
Charles. Sorry, Charles.
Yule
is Ramses. Their two faces were on the poster. They were who people were coming to see.
Is there even a William in this movie?
I don't know. I was taking notes during the commentary, and she talks real fast, kind of the whole time. No, there's not. I don't know what movie I was pulling notes from. My
Yeah.
God.
The only William actor is William Baghdad, who was a slave uncredited.
That is not who I was looking at. Her commentary was fantastic, but she talks the entire movie.
Yeah.
Taking notes from her was a little strenuous. But he needs to talk, and I appreciate also that Cecil's attention to detail led him to then decide, well, if I can't have my main man be historically accurate, I will add context to his character in other ways. I will have, example, this scene, I will have him start building up to be a leader who has his own flaws, he has his own problems, but I'm going to have to show that a slightly different way.
Yeah, no, exactly. He's not the goody two-shoes, because let's be honest, he just conquered an entire country.
Yes. Well, and that was something that, like, Cecil had to wrestle with, right? Because, like, a huge portion of the original telling and the original, like, movie versions of Moses's one flaw in a lot of those old movies was just the murder. In a lot of them, it's just that. It's implied, like, if you know your history, then you know Cecil didn't shy away from the fact that, like, no, Moses was in Egyptian culture. He thought himself an Egyptian prince. He conquered places. Mm-hmm. But the thing that sat heaviest on his heart was this murder.
Yeah.
Despite the conquering.
Yeah. But news gets back to Pharaoh. Nefertiti's dress at this point is...
Oh, all of her costuming is immaculate.
It is.
And then, like, her, like, floating around with all of the fabric later. Mm-hmm. I love it because it just kind of shows that, like, she is a girly girl. She knows that she is meant to be pretty. That is her best asset. And she's going to flaunt it.
Yes, asset.
Yes.
Yeah, well, and it also sets her apart from everyone, all the other women in the movie, because she's allowed to live lavishly.
She is. I will say, though, I appreciate that she's not the only one in this dress style. There are other background women who are also in very sheer clothes. Granted, her, like, maidservant or, like, lady-in-waiting or whatever the Egyptian equivalent is. Her, like, nanny, almost.
No, her nanny's a Jewish woman.
Yeah, she doesn't get to dress nice. She gets very ugly clothes. But there are background women, especially in the court scenes, who are dressed similarly to her. So I appreciate that, like, because let's be honest, like, there's a lot of these movies where just the best interesting lady gets to wear, like, the sheer clothes, and everyone else gets to wear normal clothes.
Well, in an interesting way, early on, before she changes as a character, she has a lot more in common, I'd say, with Ramses than she does with Moses.
I would agree. I do think that she appreciates the attention that Moses gives her. Moses definitely, like, is shown to be very in love with her, and I know Cecil's intent was that she loves him back. And I don't think you see that love until the second half. I would argue in the first half, she is enjoying the cat and mouse game between the three of them.
You don't even see her. She becomes she becomes like Ramses in the second half, where she wants Moses because she sees Moses more as a possession rather than the man he has become.
Yes, for sure.
I mean, we get a little bit of inner squabbling. I mean, this is the part where we get Ramses seeing Nefertiti as a possession.
Yeah, it's a good line, honestly.
Yeah, we get a little bit of dumb lines where it's like, and I understand why they put it in there, because it's supposed to stir up that little hints that Moses is the deliverer, where the day of rest is now called the day of Moses, which
I like it though, because it also is attempting to, like, prove that Moses would be, if he didn't eventually leave, he would have made a good pharaoh. Like, he would have been a good leader, because, like, already he's not even a leader yet. Already though, people are like, we should have a holiday and name it Moses Day, and it's once a week.
Yeah, I guess. In back to Ramses a little bit, it has my favorite line of, like, how much of an asshole he is to Nefertiti is, whether you enjoy it or not is your own affair. Yes, no, he is. I like that he is, the way that as an actor, he is able to portray these lines. Yul does such a great job of, it's almost flirty. Like, yes, he is being an ass, but the way he says it, the way he carries himself, and the way that this scene is portrayed, where she doesn't get to show her own emotions until he has left the room, really gives off this idea that he probably thinks he's being fun and flirty. No, I know. He's not. He does. No. Here's the thing. He doesn't think he's being fun and flirty. He is being serious. Yeah, I know he's being serious, but he's being serious in that bro dude sort of way, where, like, tee-hee, I'm being serious, though. No. I legitimately think this is how good he is at playing a bad person. Is in his mind, he is right because he is the Pharaoh's son. And potentially, in his mind, to be Pharaoh.
that is his right in his head.
Yeah.
And so like to him, this is not a problem. This is not him being a bad guy. This is him stating facts.
Yeah, I mean, facts, but not in a flirty way.
To him, I would argue he is having fun and she's having none.
That's not flirty for him. It's just like it's him being sadistic.
Yeah, to him.
Yeah, but not flirty. That's completely different.
I don't know. This man is bent.
We'll get to a different sadist next season.
That is true.
But we're back to Goshen, where the city's coming along finally, and we get a cool raising of the obelisk.
It is very interesting.
Very cool practical effects. I also appreciate this treating of our human ancestors as intellectuals and not just aliens.
Yeah, no, I also appreciate that, like, this is them really showing off to the audience. Because, again, there's a ton of research in this.
Mm-hmm.
None of it is pointed out to you. None of it is spoon-fed to you. You would have already had to know that, like, wow, that snake thing that she's using to make a necklace is historically accurate. Boy, the game is correct. Like, you would have already needed to know this.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, and also the scene is showing, like, how dangerous it is, but Moses is showing his skills not only as, like, an architect and an engineer, but also as a leader.
Yeah, no. I also appreciate that this, like, really solidifies, like, the Egyptian tradition of, like, the princes didn't just sit around, because while I love The Prince of Egypt, that movie does spend a lot of time just showing off the princes, like, all they did was horse race and were asses. And, like, I appreciate that this one is trying to show, like, no, they had other duties. They had they were part of the military. They were a leader. They were expected to learn architecture and engineering.
Yeah, earning his role through deeds.
Yes.
Which, I do like the little build-up of their rivalry. Like, Ramses is like, oh, I finally got this bastard. And he, like, every time the Pharaoh says something that's kind of negative or like what should appear as negative, he's putting like this weight on the scale, which is a nice little touch. And then Moses is back like, here I forget the line he exactly says, but it's like that really good like I gotcha line of like, yeah, that's true, I did all that, but look at the results, look at what I have done.
Yeah, look at the obelisk I've got built already.
Yeah, like I'm doing your job, bro. It's like when your sibling like doesn't clean their side of the room and then throws a fit because you're already done.
Exactly. Yeah. I also really love that this is Cecil's personal scale system. He had it even before the movie was shot. It was something I believe he had from the original Cleopatra movie he shot. And it was something that he had kept in his office. He brought it onto set, and while on set, people would not freaking leave it alone. And he eventually had to take it away.
I don't blame him.
Me neither. I would have spent all day playing with it.
Yeah. And we do get a little bit of bad blue screening at this point, but
I would argue this is the worst blue screening in the whole movie.
Well, the
river's also pretty bad. I would argue this is the worst as far as like the cutout portion. And part of that is because like, first off, we had a very big budget, but Cecil was trying to get this done. He did have a deadline, and he was a very punctual man. He was never late as far as anyone could tell me.
Yeah, he had a great philosophy, by the way. His philosophy, or his mantra was, movies are made at my desk. So he had everything planned out to the T.
Yeah. If something needed to change, it was okay, because I've already planned and shot everything else around that.
Yep.
Yeah. So this is one of the scenes where, like, he recognized that, like, it would have been better to do it a slightly different way. However, that would have changed my budget. That would have changed my time. It would have changed my editing. This is going to have to suffice.
Yeah, they just didn't have time, basically. It's kind of like the, like, in Labyrinth with the Fire Tribe or whatever they're called.
Yeah.
The Fire Gang.
I do appreciate, though, again, the historical detail here and the use of flags as communication methods. Like, this is so good.
Yeah, it's fun.
It's, like, from a historical standing, this movie's a lot of fun to go through.
Oh, yeah. From here, we cut to Nefertiti dreaming of her wedding while the old maid reveals Moses' truth, which...
No! Also, real quick, I do want to point out, there has been, and I remember this rumor going around in my own living room, that Nefertiti was a misspelling of Nefertiti, because at the time, in like the early 90s and late 2000s, it like that was a name people knew. People knew Tutankhamun and they knew Nefertiti. Or Nefertiti.
Yeah.
It is not. It is a, like, Nefra is a common name. I believe it means beautiful or beloved or something like that. And so, like, it was not a misspelling. However, it was a very popular, like, rumor that went around that, like, oh, he just misspelled it and, like, didn't want to get in trouble for having, like, the wrong character during the wrong decade. No. No, it was essentially him calling his, like, leading lady Bella.
Well, he spelled her name differently, too.
He did.
Yeah. But changed an S to a Z, so I think we can forgive that a little bit.
Of course.
Or as from a Z to an S. The reason this is such a good pacing at this point is we've seen so much good for Moses, and then we have this, like, big break that puts, like, a big issue in his way. Like, yes. we knew this, but now it's finally coming to a head, and I honestly think this is some of the best acting in the movie. Is for Nefertiti's reaction when she realizes what all this implies. It's such a great reaction of, like, that oh shit moment.
Yes. Oh, 100%. This is fantastic acting. And again, I think Cecil's personal experience with having been with adoption really adds a second layer of not just like, oh, the king, the like pharaohhood is in jeopardy here, but also like his relationship to his mom. Because it is shown several times that he loves his Egyptian mom. Yeah. He's like hugging her. He's like, she's my favorite person. I love my mama. I'm a mama's boy.
Yeah. He even says that when after reuniting with Nefertiti, he sees his mom and he's like, the first person I want to see and the last I do.
Yeah. Like, he was 100% written and acted as a mama's boy in this movie. And I think that works even better. Yeah. Because, like, yes, there is the strain of like, oh, well, now he's like in jeopardy of not being the pharaoh. But like, we already know this story. We already know the ending. This adds another layer, though.
Well, what it is it also gives him a softness that Ramses doesn't have.
Exactly.
Because, on top of that, so Nefertiti kills the old woman because she's blinded by wanting to bone Moses.
Yeah, well.
And he shows up, like, right after she's just murdered this old woman.
Yeah. Girl, come on.
Which, good film 40 dialogue, but this is the part where it really shows Moses in a softer light.
Oh, yeah.
Where she's throwing herself at him.
She really is.
And it's good film 40 dialogue. He shows her the utmost respect in this. He's like, yes, but...
Yeah.
And then just goes on to all these, like, flirty little poetries about her beauty.
Yeah, no, it is very sweet, and I think it's very well done to, like, add a layer of, like, proving that he does love her without having to, like, add a layer that he would, like, Cecil would then have to undo later in the story.
It's not I love you, but you're an object. It's I love you for who you are, that bit.
Yes, but without ever taking it so far that a 1950s audience would be like, wait, he's already married in Egypt. He can't marry this gal later on. Because remember, technically Moses is already married. But, like, 1950s mindset, we can't have too serious of a relationship between those two. They can be very much in love, but it can't go too far on screen.
Yeah. Separate beds.
Exactly.
But Moses has his origin revealed, which, good on him. I appreciate this, where he double checks his sources, where he's not just taking Nefertiti's word at face value.
I appreciate
He goes to visit his people.
Yes.
Which, honestly, this is the bit where, like, I know, because I know where the story goes. It's just like, if you didn't know where the story's going, it's like, he could have wrote it out and set his people free as a king, which they do bring up later on. But...
Yeah, I do appreciate that Cecil even admits, like, if this was just me writing a story and not retelling a biblical tale, this movie would have ended differently because this doesn't make sense.
But also, it would have been a cheap ending if you had gone about that way, where it's like...
we would have cut out 2 hours worth of this movie.
Yeah, cut out 2 hours and he rises to power and it's like, oh yeah, by the way, you're Jewish.
Yeah. Oh boy.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Which, we cut to Goshen where Moses' adopted mom is already there first.
Again, he is a mama's boy, and I would like to think in the background he told his mom. But also, she knows.
No, he did tell her.
Yeah.
Because he came to her after Nefertiti is like, she died, but she told me you were a slave, you were Jewish. And so that's why he went to his mom.
Yeah.
Which, again, they do a really good job of showing that both the mothers care in their own way.
Yes.
Like, they both are truly mothers, even though adoptive mom, she truly loves Moses as her own.
Yeah, and I really appreciate that Cecil never does anything to trouble that relationship. He leaves that relationship as is and lets the rest of the story continue on without having to, like, have essentially two moms fight.
Yeah.
He leaves it as this kind of ambiguous, like, well, he doesn't have time to worry about this new family dynamic. He can love both. He can still love his OG mom. He can love his adoptive mom. But now we have other problems.
Yeah. Well, they've got some very touching moments of
They
like
do.
Yoshiba touching his arm very longingly of like,
Yeah.
you can tell it's a mother who's basically watched her child from a distance.
Yeah.
But then, after all this, you get the very casual, nonchalant, I am your brother Aaron. I am your sister Miriam.
Yeah, these two were repeat actors from Cecil, and like, they were not originally slated as both of these roles. They got shifted around a little bit, but he had promised that he would be working with them again, and he did not feel like they should be working on the Egyptian. He wanted them on this film. And so, like, they did eventually land in these roles. Neither of them felt like 100%, but Cecil was one of those people that, like, when you worked with him, everyone bent over backwards to do as he asked.
Yeah, it's like, what's his name? Jonah Hill working with, was it Jonah Hill? Yeah, Jonah Hill working with Martin Scorsese.
Yes.
Where he's like, I don't care what you pay me. I just want to be in your film, dude.
100%. It was a very similar mindset from all of the interviews I could find with everyone who worked with him. So, like, even though neither of them, I think, were, like, a perfect fit for this, Cecil saw them as this role. This is what he promised them they would be in this movie. He promised them somewhat big roles. And so, this is where we ended up.
And it's just a funny moment because we have this very touching bit, and it's just like, I am your brother.
Yeah, this was also part of the reason why Cecil wanted to have Moses say most of his lines, even though later on in the story, a huge portion of the tale of Moses is that Aaron is the, like, mouthpiece of Moses. Like, he does a lot of the speaking. He's the liaison between Moses and Pharaoh in the original stories. Cecil wanted to keep that, because he did want to keep this as close as he could. Mm-hmm. But he also, like, really wanted his main man to be the main man. Yeah,
and he does.
He does. No, he does a great job.
Yeah. But also, this is the bit I mentioned where the mom has a point, like, the only person who can set the slaves free is the Pharaoh, and I mean, if you play your cards right, you can still be Pharaoh.
No, she has a good point.
Yeah.
Another really fun detail is the, like, bit of cloth that Moses, like, finds and then brings to his mom to be like, look, it's me. This was a piece that was woven in the most historical way possible. Mm-hmm. It was originally meant as, like, a sample piece. They liked it so much they decided to make it, like, the main square. And this was, like, a prized prop possession that, like, was then taken off set and kept, as far as everyone can tell, until the main actor's dying days. It was, like, a prized possession of his.
Well, yeah, I don't blame him. I mean, it's his.
Yeah, no, it's amazing.
Yeah, which, I also, I think this part's a little bit weird where now they all of a sudden believe he's the deliverer. Like, I don't get why they assume that.
So, this is part of where I think Cecil glosses over a lot of, like, the historical context, because he wants you to already know, and, like, he put it in, but he wanted you to catch it. He's not going to explain it to you, right? This is similar. There's a lot of prophecy that went along with the tale of Moses, especially early on, that Cecil does not directly put in, because it would have been baby bird feeding you information, and that's not his style. He very much is, like, showing you he wants to create a very full, rounded world. You already needed to know that information going in, sort of thing. And Cecil knew that not everyone was going to be reading and following and researching nearly as much as he was. However, he did kind of think that his King James version was, like, the way.
People would have his audience would have at least read the Bible once.
They would have already kind of known the prophecy that came along beforehand, the dream that the previous pharaoh had about the death and, like, the destruction and the coming plagues. Like, this would all have been pre-context that I think most people would have already known, either from being in church, because, again, 1950s, or, again, this, like, biblical drama sort of thing was a very popular movie, like, genre at the time. This is a movie people would have already seen, essentially. This would just been, like, the long version.
Okay.
People have already seen The Tale of Moses. Okay. At least 3 times, as far as I can find.
Alright, I get it. But this is the first time we have a shift in the movie, and we're not halfway through the movie still.
No, we're still on disc 1.
Yeah. It's soul-searching time, which DeMille gives us this really long narrated description of the pits, like, kind of reading a book.
Yeah.
And I love how, like, Moses's way to hide is he's just wearing a hat.
It's not even a very good hat.
Like, Baca, Vincent Price's character, shows up and doesn't even notice that Moses is right there.
Boy, just really, Clark Kenton it over here, isn't he?
Yeah, really wants Lillian to be his house slave, his little mud flower.
Yeah, gross, nasty man. I do appreciate, though, that from Cecil's point of view, he attempted to hide Moses' character by having other side characters, either Aaron or a couple of other background guys, have what he called the Moses look. So, like, more beard, the hair showing, having a little bit more tan to them.
He also appears he cut off his Prince braid.
Yeah, well, he would have to
or
run away.
hid it. That's why he has a hat, because he's hiding the braid.
Yeah, something like that.
Yeah.
So, like, but Cecil's, like, main distraction method is to have other people stand next to Moses and have them look more like Moses than Moses.
Yeah.
Which honestly is not a bad strategy.
No, not at all. But, like, it's also a little bit of, I know he's trying real hard to drive it like it's a horrible place, and it is.
Yeah.
But, like,
but this is honestly one of the most closest to realistic versions of, like, the working conditions of ancient Egypt that these versions in the 1950s have ever come close to. Normally, these are, like, honestly, Prince of Egypt is a very good example of, like, what most of these movies attempted to make it look like, where it's just slave-driving whips 24/7. Everyone is on the verge of death, as opposed to having a water girl who comes and brings you a cup of water. Does it suck here? 100% it sucks here. But we are all not on the verge of death.
No.
Except for that old man. But he doesn't count.
Well, the old man is also killed because he's trying to, like, kind of stand up.
Yeah.
And, like, it's a little, I mean, it's of its time to have, like, you're already driven us into slavery. Must you defile our women too?
Yeah, and just so that everyone kind of knows where some of these, like, side stances come from, Cecil did see himself as a bit of an influencer in the civil rights movement. He never directly took a stance, however, he did see that his works were reaching a lot of people, and so he attempted to bring a little bit of those politics into his movies. This is one of the scenes where it's, like, the clearest. However, he did a very good job of, like, incorporating it all the way through the movie. It's not, like, coming out of the blue. It's not left fielding or anything like that. But he did very much see himself as, like, a civil representative. Because he knew so many people were going to be seeing his film, he also knew this was kind of probably going to be his last one. He didn't know this was going to be the last one.
Yeah.
But, like, this was very late in his career. He did see himself as a big political figure. He had never been shy about hiding his face, his politics, his voice on anything. So having a character stand up and be very clearly for something, especially for 1950s, it's on track.
Okay, I can kind of see that.
Yeah, like, it's tied in. It's not, like, too in your face, but, like, that's why he has the whole old man scene.
We get that little sentiment of the old man wishing he could see the liver before he died.
And also, this is tying back into the concept of, like, the biblical interpretation of Moses. Like, he was meant to be almost a symbol to the people and not just a character. Cecil does a lot of heavy lifting to make him more of a character than he actually is. And this is kind of reaffirming that, like, saviorism that Moses was meant to be.
Okay. It also has one of my favorite lines in the movie. Dance, you mud turtles, dance!
It is very good.
Yeah.
I won't lie. I understand this is meant to be a miserable scene. I, however, as a child, did think the mud dancing looked kind of fun.
You are also a backwoods raccoon person.
I was a backwards raccoon person who had a mud pit to play in.
What? Wait. Okay.
It was meant to be a sand pit, but, like, it held water. And then it had ants in it. And then you add dirt to it, and it's a mud pit. And then just backyard. There's always mud in the backyard.
Fascinating.
Well, you did not go outside as much as I did as a child,
No,
apparently.
I was outside a lot. My outside was like, you go past my backyard and it's the wild wilderness of Alaska.
I was given tools from the garden shed and told go have fun. I dug holes for entertainment.
I don't know why I'm surprised by this.
I don't know why you're surprised either. Surely this is on brand.
It's on brand. I
tried to explain this to my husband the other day. I was like, yeah, the mud scene looks kind of fun. And he's like, no, it's meant to be miserable. I was like, no, it's meant to be miserable. But, like, the idea of stomping around in mud does kind of appeal to me.
You would have done well as a Jewish slave. Well, you'd be delivering the water.
No, I'd be dead. Let's be very honest. I'd be very dead. But, like... As a child, I would have definitely died.
Yeah, most of us would have.
Yeah, that 1 in 5 ratio is not good.
Yeah. Which, now back to the movie. As much as we've ragged on Moses' disguise, Nefertiti now shows up and already knows who he is. Like, she could pick him out from the crowd.
I appreciate that even she's like she's over here like, wow, that man's stupid. There he is. Look at him.
Yeah, I'll take that one. But it's also
the hunky one with the hat.
But it's also showing like her true colors here, where she's starting to see Moses more as a possession now, where it's like...
this is definitely her shift.
Yeah, it's like, hey, you can come over. I won't tell anyone. She has
leverage.
Yeah. Which there's also a line in this where she's like, your name shall last beyond the pyramids. And to be fair, it has. Also, to make point, the Great Pyramids of Giza were about 1,175 years before Moses, so...
Look, they did a lot of research. Again, like I said, the research that was done for this movie is different than how we would do research for, like, a historical biblical film nowadays, but at the time, they were doing their best.
Yeah, close.
Close.
But, you know...
1,000 years off.
Moses lived for a couple hundred years himself, so...
You know what? This is better than The Patriot, so I'll give it to it.
Yeah. And Braveheart.
Oh, a lot better than Braveheart.
Yeah. But from here, we're on to the Master Builder, Baka.
Baka.
I know. Sussy Baka.
Yeah, a little bit.
I fucking hate that shit.
But the mustache really goes with it here.
Oh, it's great.
Yeah.
But Joseph's here to fuck shit up. Like, he honestly... She probably could have gotten away without his help. Like, she wasn't really that guarded. But also, when he, like, doesn't recognize Moses when he shows up to kill him is just, like, so stupid. And
yeah. It's stupid. But, like, it's kind of stupid in, like, a fun movie-ish sort of way. So, like, I don't care.
No. Well, because they get away and immediately they're like, they got real crack crime scene investigation here where they're like, oh, it had to have been this person. Oh, but then they have to be told by the rat, the Judah character, whatever his name is.
I can't remember.
So Dathan.
Dathan, that's it.
Yeah.
That's it.
But also, I think Dathan works showing that evil can lurk wherever. Because he and Ramses both have the same thing. They want power, regardless of how little power it kind of is for Dathan.
I mean, it would have been quite a lot, because they do show, granted, this is again Cecil showing and not telling you. As the movie progresses, he does get more people and stuff that he kind of parades around.
Yeah.
But, like, he never tells you that, so you do have to be paying attention.
Yeah, well, they want power in women, basically.
Especially that man.
Yeah. And this is where Ramses is like, ooh, I'm going to be Pharaoh now. Eat shit, Moses, because it's Jubilee time. There's a little line that you hear, no Moses, no Jubilee.
Yeah.
But Ramses does have some very good dialogue where, like, he shows up a little bit earlier on where he's like, the Pharaoh's like, find the deliverer. If he's myth, bring him in a jar. If he's real, bring him in chains.
That's such a good line, though.
Oh, it's very good.
Yeah, there's some great writing.
Because, oh fuck. Moses is delivered in chains.
There he is.
And the Pharaoh is not a very forgiving man.
No, and I appreciate that we've seen the Pharaoh. Like, he's not a mystery figure, but we don't know a lot about him, other than that Ramses and Moses kind of, they see him both as a father and a worship figure. He is very much a god on earth. Yeah,
no, exactly. I mean, that's what their role was at that point.
Exactly.
And so, like, he's been betrayed by his own flesh and blood. And not his own flesh and blood, but honorably his flesh and blood.
I mean, the man he saw as his father for his whole life.
Or no, his son.
Yeah, exactly. Sorry.
No, all good. But the thing is, at least they're realistic about their situations. Everyone is just like, okay, this is the way the world is. Sorry, but Ramses, you're going to have to determine his punishment. And Ramses is, in a way, kind of poetic, where he's like, I could murder you, but I don't want a martyr on my hands. So I punish you with life.
Yeah, I also appreciate how, and this is better explained in the commentary, I think in the film it comes across a little bit more heavy-handed in the, like, Ramses' evilness. There were several other punishments that Cecil was aware that, like, Ramses could have passed out to Moses, right? Being given money and water and a walking stick and sent out into the desert in the clothes of his own people was honestly a rather generous, like, punishment based off of Cecil's understanding and, like, his research.
Well,
but I think the way that it is worded, the way that it is acted, comes across as, like, Ramses has, like, fully decided, like, that it is now him against Moses in his mind.
Yeah. Well, and also it's a good bit too. Well, we find out Yosheba died, so that's the robe he's wearing. It's the robe of his dead mother and the king's scepter of a binding pole. But the one bit I like in this too is that even though he's given 1 day's rations, even the guards seem to dislike that this is how they're treated. How
Moses was popular.
Yeah, no, exactly.
Yeah,
I do also like the little bit of the step pyramids in the background, just to show that this is even more ancient land past the Great Pyramids of Giza.
I do appreciate that. There's like truly they did attempt to like create a proper like border to the to the Egypt kingdom.
There's a gateway.
Like this is as close to an actual like drawn out city that a lot of these movies come. Most of them just have palace, the set, and desert, the set. And there's not a lot.
The movie.
Honestly, yeah.
Yeah.
No, it feels a lot like Aladdin the movie, where there's like a sea of desert and nothing else. This one does a very good job, and I do think a lot of that comes to Cecil's pilgrimage to Egypt. He did spend a lot of time at the mountain. I think there is a monastery there that he spent a good deal of time doing research there. There's some filming that was done at the base there. They use their sheep, I think, for several of the scenes that are coming up just in a second. And I think that understanding of the landscape helped Cecil like build out this world into something other than city and desert. There's more. Yeah,
because we get a narration of how hopeless his trials are, and it's kind of a cheesy struggle, like when he falls down in the stand.
It's very cheesy. But it's not the cheesiest one I've ever seen.
No.
And honestly, for how long this movie is, and at what point this comes in, at this point, I've already had to get up to get a little drink. I've probably missed this.
Yeah. And Moses grew his beard real quick, too. Like, the passage of time in this is so quick.
Wishy-washy?
Oh, yeah.
No. And part of that was because Cecil recognized that he had hired for his main men 2 very attractive young men, who he then needed to age up quite a lot.
I will say the aging of Moses is done very well in this movie.
I agree up until the very last version of Moses. I have gripes with the very oldest version of Moses, and we will get to why.
Yeah, alright. But I also think this part's a little funny too, because of course he finds sheep, a symbol of Christianity.
Well, and also like this is going to be Moses' profession.
Yeah, and also a group of women who are only thinking of men, but he's found by Sephora, his future wife.
Yeah.
And like the really cheesy line of like, oh, we gotta help him. Who cares? He's from Egypt. Who cares? He's a man. He's a man. Oh.
I do appreciate how typical girly they made the sisters.
So, like not even like typical girly, like typical high school.
Yes.
Or like sorority girl.
They are such sorority girls, and I honestly really like that for them. I feel like it does help define the future love interest, Sephora, versus her sister. She's much more mature and a little bit less girly girl. She's clearly the one that has taken on the most thought and responsibility out of her sisters, even though they are all working.
She's the oldest sibling.
She's the oldest, and she definitely seems to have that weigh on her mind a lot, whereas her sister's a lot more free and, like, bouncy. And while all of them are rather distinct, like, they all get their own dialogue, they all get their own personalities, it is nice to be able to finally group a bunch of them over and just be like, and the sisters.
Yeah.
Because we have a lot of people in this movie.
Yeah. Well, it's also funny, too, because they say there's no man for miles, and then, like, they find a man.
6 more men show up.
Then 3 Malachites are there in a minute.
Yeah,
which
I do also love this scene, because they show up, and I appreciate that, again, there's more historical context, that, like, there was a lot of research done. This was part of the research he did at the monastery amongst them, and, like, talking with the locals there, and their history about marking the wells, and, like, how property and sheep would have been handled at the time. And so it's stupid, it's cheesy, because in reality, these girls probably could have beaten the hell out of these men. They have been shepherds their whole lives. They all have sticks. There's more of them than the men.
They got a little bit of farm muscle.
Yeah, like, in reality, I'm sure they could have put up a fight, and Moses' help would have been appreciated, but not, like, the only thing needed.
Yeah, Moses comes in like fucking Kirk from the Enterprise, punching his way through shit.
No, and, like, he takes all of them out in one hit. And he was on the verge of death a second ago.
Yeah.
He, like, passed out in a bush, wakes up, and, like, just flying out of nowhere takes out a man. And it's great. I love it.
And then immediately he's ready to be like, yes, I will serve thee, women.
I appreciate, too, because, like, this is another scene where I think Cecil is leaning very heavily on his audience knowing Bible culture and Bible history with the washing of the feet, the use of hair. And this isn't the only scene where he has his background women characters using their hair to either brush or polish things or wipe things. This is all information that he would have expected his audience to already know. He probably assumed that most of them have either watched his other movies or go to church often enough to have heard the other stories. And so, like, all of this is, like, done without telling you, which opens up room for all these girls to just be flirty.
Oh, yeah.
And it works. I think it just kind of adds without having to be, like, spoon-fed anything.
Yeah, and it also definitely sets Sephora apart because she's not out there. She's just trying to live for her. She's not after Moses.
And those of you who are paying very close attention will notice that we had complained earlier about how, like, yes, this is a film full of white people, but he did have contacts added. But Sephora is not wearing contacts. Mm. She was originally asked to, and she could not stand how to get Technicolor to work, the lights had to be incredibly bright. And they were very hot, and they could not run the AC at the time because the microphones would have picked it up. So she complained to Cecil about how she could not see with these contacts in. Because again, these are very old contacts. Mm-hmm.
Glass contacts.
They're thick. Yeah. They were thick contacts. The lights made it impossible for her to see, and she needed to be on set an awful lot. And especially in front of these lights, because they had them as bright as they could, because again, she's meant to be in the desert most of her scenes.
Yeah, remember from our very, very, very first episode of the podcast when we talked about Technicolor on The Wizard of Oz.
Yes.
And the fact that you had to have a crazy amount of light for this camera to work.
Yes. So she brought the idea to Cecil that she should be one of the few women who is allowed to have her natural eye color, because A, she thought it was her most striking feature, and it would set her apart as the ideal person for Moses to eventually fall in love with. It would set her apart for the audience to recognize. And Cecil kind of enjoyed that idea that, like, yeah, this is, like, the one true love of Moses eventually.
Yeah.
Sure, honey, you don't need to wear it. And while at the time, according to a few interviews that I could find before his death, he did claim that it was mostly because of the lights and that her acting needed to be, and that he did like the idea of the gray eyes. He also eventually did admit that he thought it was her most striking feature, and she was forced to wear a very big wig for most of this movie. And while he insisted that his ladies all wear the wigs because it makes them look the part. Mm-hmm. He did think that it hid who she was a little bit too much. And he's like, she's one of my best actresses, and they need to know who she is. They're here to see her.
Yeah, I get it. Yeah, but it's just funny little behind the scenes things you stumble across.
It is, because again, like, she tried very hard to wear the contacts, because again, everyone who worked with Cecil tried very hard to lean over backwards to do anything that he said or asked. In fact, she even flew out to Egypt in scenes that she was not part of, so that she could see the filming process and see the desert, because most of her scenes are filmed on a stage. Yeah. She's almost never actually in Egypt for any of her shots. I think there's like one or two of her running through a desert scene, and that's kind of it.
After this part, I don't think we're ever back on Egypt.
I don't think we are either.
We have backgrounds.
We have backgrounds, but like she's never in Egypt after this. And so she flew herself out as, like, proof of dedication, and he thought that was great, and, like, gave her super brownie points for, like, showing up.
Kudos. After his rescue, we're on to the hut, where we get a little bit of exposition to explain God and Abraham, which...
I do appreciate this exposition, because, again, Cecil did want this to be a movie for anyone, even though he definitely did think probably you already knew this stuff.
Well, the reason it's good for the story is because... One, Moses is now in simple garb, but we have to have explanation to Moses about the religion because he doesn't know his heritage.
Exactly.
He spent barely an afternoon in the mud pits.
He pretended to be poor like billionaires do with homelessness.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
But it's also explaining that, like, hey, this group of people he's with, they are putting their lives on the line because they know he's a slave of Egypt and that he's technically a criminal, but, that's how it is.
But they are welcoming and warm, and I do appreciate how this version of the movie handles his welcoming into the group. I do think the exposition and the explanation of Abraham and the God adds more than a lot of others, and while I really love the, like, version that Prince of Egypt does, which I honestly think is probably the closest, like, comparison movie that we have. It's much more modern. I know it's animated. I like how that one handles it because it is done in a more modern, friendly fashion. I think this is better, though, from a historical and story composition, because it explains why these people are being kind to him.
I don't think I've seen the animated one.
It is amazing.
I know it's like on one of the top 100 animated
so
films
good.
ever.
It's so good.
I've seen chunks of it because they used to play it. Because here's fun fact: I went to Christian school for a very long time of my childhood.
Yep. Yeah, no, it was a repeat watch in our house. Specifically at my school. But I do think that this movie, like, that one is clearly meant for kids. That's why it's a musical. That's why it's got the fun colors. That's why it's animated, to be honest.
That's why it's got its silly songs.
And honestly, it's why they make Moses a much younger version of Moses. Like, he's, like, early 20s.
Well, that they even bring that up in the commentary is that, like, Moses, when he leaves Egypt, he's, like, in his 40s, and when he returns, he's in his 60s.
Yeah, no, Moses is crazy old, and they do a good job, I think, handling that age in this version, but I think this is a much more adult version of the story, even though Cecil did want children to be able to watch it. He was not aiming at children, so having this explanation and leaving the gap open for the audience to then make the connection of the reason that he has been welcomed into this group is because of their belief. I think is a much better and smarter writing method.
And even though Moses isn't a full convert yet, because he's telling Sephora beneath the mountain, because this is when we finally see Mount Zion.
Which is, by the way, shot on the actual Mount Zion, which is very cool. Most people don't get to do that.
Or the background shot with it.
Yes.
They're on a set. They're
on a set, but the background is the actual mountain, along with most of the clouds. There's a few clouds that are added in, but most of that is what it actually looked like.
Especially, like, the glowing kind of Mountain Doomy fire around it.
Which apparently occasionally, like, it did light up a little bit, but they had to add, because Technicolor.
Yeah. But Moses wants to see God. Like, he's not a full believer. He only believes what he sees.
Sure.
And even with that, we're on to the shearing festival, which shows Moses would have done well wherever he was. He's a natural born leader. He's a good shepherd. Yeah. But Sephora won't be participating because he's the hot shit and she doesn't want anything to deal with him, while the sisters are all over him, or ready to be all over him.
Falling over him.
Dressed like the shepherd Power Rangers.
They really are. Again, like, Cecil had all of his ladies wearing wigs, and these are 1950s wigs. They were very heavy. They were pinned to the girls' actual hair. And a lot of the ladies complained, but did not want to give up, so they waited until the shots were completely done with the set, and then complained to Cecil that having them toss their hair like that really hurt. Because, like, when I say pinned, I mean, like, actually pinned. Not cute bobby pins. No. Pinned to their hair, so flipping their hair around, pulled on their actual hair and scalp, and they're like, these wigs are already heavy. It is 1 billion degrees in here. I am not having a good time. But they waited to tell him until after the shots were done, because they didn't want to tell him no.
I don't blame him. I mean,
it turned out good. I do think you can tell a little bit, but it's such a small scene.
Oh yeah, they spent a week doing this, and then we never see these sisters again because...
No, they're honestly gone. Bye.
Yeah, Moses chooses Sephora, which... This is the part where Mount Zion looks really cool.
It does. It looks really good.
But now we cut back to Egypt where the Pharaoh's dying, and then we cut back to Moses who has a kiddo now, and...
Yeah, you know.
Told that there's some dude with the sheep, but oh shit, it's Joshua who... No explanation of why he's out here. Again,
this is information that Cecil assumes you already know. But yeah, it's because he has been kicked out of Egypt.
Okay.
Similar problems to Moses. He is a strong-headed, and I can't remember the exact reasoning in Cecil's research version of why he gave of, like, oh, this is the time period and how he would have ended up at this point. Like, Cecil did a lot of timeline sort of work.
Yeah, and he's only there basically just to say, hey, it's worse out in Egypt
he is
for us.
Literally just there to be like, help!
Yeah, and now we get the burning bush with it's kind of a cheesy effect now.
But I do appreciate this. So I've seen quite a few of the other movies that are the Moses telling, right? Almost every single one of them before this movie shows the burning bush as actually on fire. It is either physically actually on fire, like they found a bush and they set it on fire, and they had a time limit on how long they had to film. Which was honestly kind of a cool scene in that movie. One version had a, like, overlay of the fire over a bush. So the bush was not itself burning, but, like...
Double exposure.
It's like, I mean, it's the 40s, so, like, it's very double exposure, you know? So, like, meh, whatever. This version, I think, is a very fun interpretation. And this is giving Cecil room to show without, like, directly being like, I took a few liberties.
Mm-hmm.
Because he tried to advertise this as like, I did so much research. But then on the side, he had to keep saying like, the 1950s house cannot watch this. I have to tone this down. I have to change this. I need to make sure my main cast is people that they will recognize.
Mm-hmm.
And so this is a way for him to get away with a little bit more creative liberty and also like interpretation, because he did do a lot of interpretation, but he had to explain it to households that like, we're going to watch this movie and take it as fact. So this is him getting a chance to be like, look at the art. Don't forget this is a movie. We're having fun.
Yeah, I can see that a little bit. But, I mean, it's also such a short moment, too, at this point, because it's just like, hey, go let your people free.
No, that's honestly, that's how it is.
Yeah. And we get, like, his real first true aging instead of just growing a beard.
I really like this aging, too. A lot of the other ones do, like, just give him full white.
Mm-hmm.
In the other movies, I like that we go with the streaked, like, wind-blown look. Like, he's just been, like, X-Men styled. Given superpowers. I really like it. I think it looks really good. I think it's very striking. This is kind of the look that's on most of the posters, or like most people remember of this version of Moses. And I think it works because it sets him apart from all the other versions of Moses.
Yeah, it's the iconic one.
It really is. This one is the one that stands out.
Yeah. And finally, we are on to part 2 of this goddamn movie.
Yes. And what happens when we get to part 2? Intermission! And it is an actual intermission. I believe it's about 4 minutes long of actually sitting there and listening to the composition of the beautiful orchestra.
Pull up my Switch, catch a Pokemon or
This
two.
is when you actually do go to the bathroom and get yourself a new snack. And I actually, again, I'm a fan!
I know.
But I understand that especially since I had to watch this movie 3 times in a row, it does grate a little bit if you're trying to get through things quickly.
Mm-hmm.
But if you're not, it is nice. Yeah. And I will say, since this movie is on TV every single year, this is when most of the family go, the intermission's on, the good part's starting. Because honestly, from here on forward, this is the part everyone remembers.
Yeah, we are like 2.5, almost 3 hours into the movie at this point.
Yes, I do appreciate that the second half is much faster paced. Mm-hmm. And it has all the cool, like, trick shots, kind of. Like, it has all the miracles, it has all of the, like, magic.
The
practical effects are stage magic-y, but I like them.
No, they're good. They're good. They still stand, I think.
No, they do still stand.
Yeah. But we do have this few dynamic shots of 3 sphinxes as we read scripture in our return to Egypt.
Yep.
This is the one time I can believe that they don't recognize Moses for the first time.
I also wouldn't recognize Moses for the first time. I do think it's funny, though, that he purposefully had Moses wear the same robes for as long as possible to help the audience recognize Moses, because he knew that Moses was going to look very differently for 4 stages. And Cecil kind of broke it out into, like, 4 stages of Moses' life, was how he thought of it. But for an audience perspective, like, you don't really care. You just see, like, young Moses, middle Moses, old Moses. Holy crap, old Moses.
Yeah. Why are you still alive, Moses?
We're gonna get to that Moses. That's my beef.
Yeah. And we do get the cool transformation of the snakes, although I will say the transformation back from a snake is
so
much
cool.
better.
Oh, it looks great.
Yeah,
No, this was, like, my favorite scene as a kid. I thought this movie, well, because, like, this was also, like, the kind of, like, magic that was on TV. Like, this was the one that, like, other than the gross magic, because there was a lot of, like, gross street magic when we were kids that was, like, on TV, where, like, people were putting coins in their arms and moving it around and stuff like that. Or, like, levitating across the pool. If it wasn't that sort of magic, it was this sort of magic, whereas, like, turning one thing into another thing very quickly, but this was, like, my favorite version of magic, and so I thought this scene was just so cool, because, like, to me, in my young eyes, watching this on the TV, I had a hard time recognizing between, like, plastic snake to real snake, back to plastic snake, and then the cut is so clean between snake and staff.
Yeah.
Like, I was so impressed with this as a child, and I'm still impressed.
It's still good, but it's also a good way to show that Moses is back and he has power now.
Yeah, like, his God is now on his side.
Kind of.
And I also appreciate that this is, while I know that, like, again, the script is pre-written, this is the story of Moses, I like how Cecil handles introducing the miracles, because he does cut out some miracles, because some of them are silly.
Well, and also they filmed them and they're like, this looks stupid.
Because, again, frogs are silly.
Yeah. But even before we get to that, I mean, we're back to the Jewish people, and everyone is so ready to leave. They're like, oh, he's here, he's going to deliver us right away, which I think here's the thing about this bit too. From a story writing standpoint, it's a weak use of his power because the whole thing is like, Moses is like, why did this not work? And it's like, well, he told you what to tell him and what to do and say. Like, it's supposed, like, I understand Moses' disappointment. Like, you told me to do this. It didn't do shit. Also, the Jewish people in this one are so quick to want to stone Moses. It makes me think of the peasants in Monty Python and the Holy Grail.
No.
Button the witch, stone the deliverer!
Yes. Okay, I like how Cecil wrote the Hebrew nation in this, because again, this is Cecil using the original text and being so thorough with his research and reading of it. This was a detail that he pulled out of like, wow, every time something bad happens in this story, there is a very quick turnaround on either finding someone new to lean on, finding someone new to like look up to or have lead, or just like an immediate like, well, it's hopeless sort of mindset, which like, for Cecil, like, he really grasped onto that. I was like, I need to show that off a little bit more. Because in other movies, the Hebrews are shown as kind of like a homogenous group, and they're not given much voice. It's mostly just Moses. We have people now in this version that, like, we know their names, we know their story, we know their relationships to people, and it's not just Aaron. Like, it's, like, several people that we can relate to. We've seen them. And so, like, we have to make them a little bit complainy bitchy, because, like, that's how the story goes. And I appreciate that Cecil, like, leaned in a little bit, because it does make the later, like, the very last chapters of, like, Moses' frustrations feel more valid.
No, and yeah, it's a fun little bit. It's just funny to me seeing...
Oh, no, you're 100% right, and you caught something that, like, the rest of the audience who's watching this, who, like, has heard this story 100 times, who have, like, listened to the prophecy, who knows that, like, technically Moses knows the prophecy already. He knows that there's going to be tribulations. They don't know exactly what, but they know they're going to be, like, a mass problem, and it's not just showing up with some snakes, right? Moses knows this, and he was hoping that God would be like, well, tee-hee, that's not gonna happen. This is Old Testament God, though, and, like, that man was not playing.
No.
So, like, I appreciate that Cecil, like, went ahead and, like, led the audience just a little bit, because he knows he did a lot more research than most people have put into this.
Yeah, he summarized their disappointment in one quick little line.
And I appreciate that a lot.
Yeah. And even here, we're quickly on to Nefertiri, who does save him from being stoned, which I always did. I didn't understand the term being stoned as a kid because I knew it from that 70s show first.
Of course you did.
And so I thought, I didn't understand, like, what it meant in that context.
I do appreciate that, like, he uses the Nefertiti character in such, like, a smart way to, like, play on to, like, she probably did love him, but she now has a twisted view of, like, what is good and how to truly love someone.
Yeah, she's very materialistic now.
Yes, but, like, she, like, somewhere deep down, she does still love him.
Yeah, because even though Ramses is Pharaoh, she still technically has the power. If she killed Ramses, then...
And this is something that I do think I wish there would have been, like, a little bit more info on. In the commentary, it's explained better, and this is research that Cecil found. Granted, whether or not this is, like, new historical research has proven otherwise, but according to the research Cecil had, it was understood that the women were the ones who decided the pharaoh, because only mom can know who is truly pharaoh.
Yeah.
And so, like, Nefertiti being Nefertiri. I'm gonna do it all the time. Nefertiri being, like, now the main woman in the palace, honestly does have the power to, like, declare suddenly, like, JK, your son, who you think is the next pharaoh, I've decided he's not. It's this other person over here. Like, theoretically, technically, according to Cecil's research, again, like, version he has, she has all of the power despite being an object and under the possession of Pharaoh.
Yeah, she's like a very fancy staff.
She is.
Yeah.
No, exactly.
A very curvy staff.
And also, have you noticed that her outfits have gone from bright and colorful and fun and almost girlish to more and more gold and heavy and, like, draped with belts and, like, almost plated? Her necklaces have turned away from being, like, the beaded, multicolored of having both the upper and lower were Egypt represented to having mostly gold or mostly just the warrior blue.
Did not catch that.
This is something that I caught because I love the costuming in this movie. I think it's fantastic. The detail is amazing. The consistency, minus the safety pin, fantastic. And so, like, this is something that she, as her character progresses, she slowly gets turned into, like, a gold idol. She slowly dissolves away from wearing, like, fun, cute pink and light baby blue. And, like, she's shown with having, like, purples and greens and, like, colors that would have been very expensive to make. And, like, she slowly devolves into almost wearing exclusively golds and silvers and whites.
Almost like she's shackled down.
Yeah, or, like, becoming an idol herself.
Yeah, okay, I can see that. Or sees herself as an idol.
Yeah, like, she sees herself as like, a statuette or a thing now, as well.
Interesting. Now we're back to the Jewish people. Warning of no water for 7 days, and little return to the romance, and it's whatever at this point, kind of.
Yeah, I mean, I do like the character building, and I do think that it keeps the pace of the movie well. But again, this movie's very long, and by this point, I'm here for miracles. Give me the cool magic shots.
Yes, which we're now to the blessing of the water, which I think this is such a funny bit too, at least from my standpoint, is that Pharaoh's just kind of letting Moses walk around what is technically sacred grounds.
Oh yeah, he could have had him thrown out immediately. Instead, he's like, I don't care about that guy.
It's just a crazy old dodge.
Yeah, no,
whatever.
Like, I do appreciate that, like,
Codger.
Moses has been gone long enough that Ramses feels secure in his power. Like, he has kind of forgotten how much of a pain in the ass Moses was for him.
Yeah, and I guess that's a good way of showing him letting his guard down, because we do get a really cool scene of, like, turning the water to blood.
Yeah, it looks so good, and I love how, like, when they're explaining how they did it, they have a guy in scuba gear under the water with a hose, and he's got it kinked, and at the right signal, he just, like, lets it go, and then swims away.
Yeah, or, like, the vessel itself, it's double chambered.
Cool. Yeah, so, like, the farther you pour, the more, like, red comes out. It looks so good.
No, it's very cool.
And the acting that goes along with it is really, really impressive. Like, the disgust, the horror, like, is very realistic and portrayed well. Like, this is one of my favorite versions of the plagues, I think, because, like, everything is done with a seriousness, but it's not Passion of the Christ serious where, like, no one's having any fun. Like, the magic trick is still cool.
Yeah.
But also gross.
Yeah, no, exactly. Although I will say the larger scale is not the greatest, but it's still solid for a 1956 movie.
No, and it's one of those, again, it's one of those, like, scenes where Cecil was like, could I have done it a little better? Yes. Did I have a schedule that I promised to keep? And that was important to me. Yes. Yeah.
Because from here, we're immediately on to the rest of the plagues, where we only really get them narrated. All we ever see in the movie is water, fire, popcorn hail, death.
Do you like the popcorn hail?
And darkness, because the other ones were too difficult or silly to do, which...
They're mostly silly.
Moses just giving warnings. I mean, he's just... which is kind of funny, too, because he's like, submit by force. Yeah. Our force is stronger.
It's 100% what happens.
Yeah. It's exactly what he did as a prince for Ethiopia.
No. Okay, Moses really doesn't change a whole lot. It's just which version that he is working with.
Yeah, which side he's on.
Yeah, and, like, this side has decided, and, like, granted, they did film the frog scene, and then they were like, wow, this looks goofy. And so they cut it. I wish there was a deleted scene where I could see the frog scene.
Same here.
Because the frogs is one of those ones that as a child I was like, oh, that's the worst one. And then I, was a Little House on the Prairie kid, and I went, oh no, the locust is the worst one, because I read that book, and that's terrifying.
Yeah.
But honestly, they're all terrible.
Well, if you were the French... Oh, this sweet frog leg. Oh, this is not a plague tooth.
See, no, like, that's why as an adult, I understand why Cecil went, no, this is a little goofy. We gotta cut this one out. I do love this version of the final plague, the death, the pestilence, as Cecil thought of it, is by far one of the best versions, I think. It is both creepy and eerie, and you also have this actual sense of fear, because there is, like, they gave this fog, like, a tangible, almost physical form by having it swoop through the streets, but it's, like, directed, it's controlled. It seems to be, like, sentient in a way because of how they're controlling it with other airflows. And it looks so good.
Yeah. Well, and they just there are so many cool practical effects in this that they do so well.
Yes.
And even though, like, I joke it's popcorn hail.
Because it was actually popcorn that they used as hail. But like, it looks good!
Yeah, you can't tell from that distance.
No, I totally, like, up until they told me it was popcorn, I was like, well, it must be small chunks of foam at the very least. Mm-hmm. But no, popcorn's brilliant. It's cheap, it doesn't hurt. Mm-hmm. You can sweep it up and do it again.
Well, and also from a writing standpoint, is Ramses thinks he's so invincible now that he's Pharaoh.
Yes.
That it's really it's more striking his ego, and that's why his people are suffering, is because he's thinks so highly of himself.
There is a detail that, and I think a lot of it came down to the actor's portrayal of Ramses. Did you notice that this pharaoh, Ramses, seems to be much more attached to his son than his father was to him?
Yes.
He is constantly with the son, and like his son was, the child was originally written as like a timid character, but the boy who was playing him was not a timid child, so they just rewrote the character to be like a very brash kind of out there princeling.
For like the couple scenes we see him in too.
And honestly, he does a great job. Like, he portrays this like devoted son. Like, Ramses dotes on him. He has him with him almost everywhere. It seems like it's like the puppy that follows him constantly. And so like this upcoming death of Ramses' kid, I think is much more impactful than other versions of this story, where like you get told Ramses has a kid, and like, yeah, the Prince of Egypt kind of does this similar version of like, oh, well, like, this is my favorite son. This version, though, this is his only son, and his by far his favorite human. Like, he doesn't even like his wife this much.
No, not at all. And it's a good point to point out, because it really shows the impact of the death of the firstborn, because Ramses does follow in his father's footsteps. And also, the reason Ramses doesn't die, and I had to look this up because I was always confused because I assumed Ramses was the firstborn. Ramses wasn't. He was technically the secondborn, even though he was the oldest at this point because his other brother died.
Yep, because that 1 in 5 rule really gets you back in the old times.
Yeah. But we also get a little bit of like the two women leads meeting that I don't really think... It doesn't do much other than like try and turn Nefertiti into like more of a sympathetic, like she's here because she's her mother. She doesn't want her child dead.
I appreciate that, because Cecil really did want her to have a true love for Moses, and I think to have that show and like be understood, she does need to have a love for her child and have a compassion for Moses's people. Like she knows, she has known for a long time, and she has used it as leverage up until now. And so while I agree, it adds to the length of the movie and technically doesn't really add anything, I do think it finally rounds out her character, because we're never going to see her again.
No. Well, we see her for a little bit.
Yeah, like a half a second.
No, she has a big part. She cods Ramses into going to chase Moses.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah, and we also get a little bit of Joshua and Lilia with Dathan is now a full convert. I mean, it's just fine.
I would like to point out that the actor who played Dathan had been... This movie happened during the Red Scare, and so Dathan is portrayed by Edward Robinson, and he had been blacklisted as a communist or even a spy. Like, it was never very clear on which one, like, was the thing on the blacklist, but, like, he had been tied to the Red Scare, which means he had been out of work for several months, and Cecil had learned about this, looked into it himself, and was like, this doesn't seem fair. Tell you what, I can't give you a good part, but I can give you a part in my upcoming movie. And Edward directly credits Cecil with, like, the saving of his career. He's like, if I hadn't gotten this part and this movie hadn't done as well as it had, I would have been out in acting.
Yeah, well, and that's just a great way of showing how DeMille really was as a person, where he's like, yeah, this is kind of dumb, but, like, playing in with the sensibilities of the time and turning it into a good opportunity.
Exactly.
Where it's like, oh, like, of course the communist is playing the Judah character, or Judas.
And it also, like, really shows Cecil's character as a person, too, because, like, he really did stand by this, like, if you work for me, you work for me for life. You will never be out of work, you will never be out of part, I will find you something to do. Like, to the point where he had one guy who he does, like, admit, like, oh, yeah, technically this actor is, like, playing both a Hebrew and an Egyptian several times.
Yeah.
But, like, I had promised him a full career, a full movie.
Yeah.
And his part technically ended, like, 3 scenes ago, halfway through the movie, and I couldn't do that to him. So, like, now he's over here, just don't look too close.
No,
it's
exactly. But there is one little thing that I like coming up that we see a little bit here where Bitha, Moses' Egyptian mom, is freed, and she seeks salvation with her son.
Yes, just leaning in again to the whole Moses savior thing.
Well, and also just that Moses is accepting while the others are doubtful and mistrusting. And to be fair, she is part of the Egyptian royalty and why they're...
But also, like, I appreciate that this version of Moses is really leaned in to be a mama's boy. Like, he is... I would argue the most kind version of Moses that I think most movies portray. A lot of them end up with him being somewhat bitter, because at the end of the story of Moses, he is a bitter man. I appreciate that this movie does a good job of trying to show that, like, there are several people in his life that he truly loved. His mom was one of them. Yeah.
And, yeah, it's well, and also her character and how she changes is...
It is.
If she had been born with different circumstances, I think it's her raising of Moses that shows, like, him really caring as a character, because when the tides are parted, she's in there helping them try and get out of it before it collapses.
Yeah.
But kids, all the firstborns are done because, you know, eye for an eye, fuck them kids who had nothing to do with this.
Yeah, no, this movie's, the story's a little brutal, but yeah.
Yeah. Ramses is too late to save his own kiddo, which solid wax dummy there, by the way.
And also, like, the whole symbolism of having the gods hold him in death, like, this is such a beautiful scene.
Oh, yeah. I mean, really well shot.
Yeah, no, the acting looks great, too, because, like, as a mother, she's, like, struggling to carry... Because, like, at the beginning, this is actually the kid pretending to be dead, and then it changes once it's on the statue to being the wax figure.
Well, when they're carrying the kid, too, because when they had to transition him, they didn't want him moving.
But when it's her holding him, it's her holding the kid, and he was a little heavy, and so she's struggling, but it ended up working so well.
Yes.
And then having the father take him and being the strong and proud man, he holds him like he weighs nothing. It looks so good. The scene is so powerful. It's very moving.
Very much so, because immediately after this, we have Moses just staring over Egypt with the dawn rising, dawn of freedom in Exodus, which...
True.
Also in this part 2, they added camels as a joke because it was stereotypical to Egypt. I also didn't know this. I didn't realize camels weren't introduced to Egypt until 525 BC.
Yeah, and this is again where Cecil and his paralysis with movies really comes into play. He had made multiple Egyptian movies at this point, and several of them he had left camels out when they were at, like, the older point, because he knew this wasn't historically accurate, but it was a complaint he had heard multiple times, like, you're in Egypt, where are the camels? And he's like, honestly, though, people are kind of right. Because, like, an Egyptian tourism was also popular at this time, as it was in the Victorian time. Like, there's waves of it being incredibly popular to go to the pyramids, to go see ancient Egypt, and camels at the pyramid was an incredibly popular, like, scene. It's something that we still see in movies today.
Well, and also it's something interesting to see, too, and hearing some of the background of how he had to change some lines. Because when Dathan's kicked out because Lillian put blood over their door, he asked the Egyptian guards, where am I supposed to go? To hell, I hope. Which he had to change. He changed that line to relate more with a modern audience because they wouldn't have the same concept as hell that we would.
Exactly.
Yeah. And honestly, this Exodus feels rather organized for just basically having a morning to get ready and go.
Yeah, again, this is part where Cecil expects you to have, like, some more knowledge, especially because this movie became a Passover, like, staple. This movie plays, I think, both at Passover and at Easter, if those two things do not align.
No, that's why it plays at Easter, is because it's close enough to Passover.
No, I think sometimes they overlap. I think they just run it for, like, a while.
Probably. I don't know.
If I remember right. I remember this being on a lot.
I haven't had cable in over a decade.
I had it, like, same. Like, and, like, let's be real. If I have only YouTube, I'm not watching this every Easter. I'm sorry.
God, no.
I have other things to do. But this is another part where, like, I'm very confident that Cecil was like, yeah, you should already kind of know, like, the timeline of, like, this is the important part of the story. This is the part everyone remembers.
This is where it really ramps up. We see a little bit of Dathan already planning his betrayal, and there's a little brief moment of Moses sitting there like, shit, what have I started? Because, like, he's, like, in a bit too deep.
Yeah.
But, like, he's like, where should I lead them? I don't even know where to go. Let's just go back to this mountain I was near and hope it works out.
Which I love how Cecil shows this, because honestly, this is, like, the rest of the story.
Mm-hmm.
And I like that this is a detail that he, again, picked up on from his original reading of the text, and his understanding of it is, like, really leaning into this whole, like, Moses wasn't super stoked to have to do this.
No. It's like, fuck, I guess I'll be the prophet.
Yeah, no, he was not excited to be the chosen one.
But, oh no, Ramses has other plans.
I love the fury that Ramses has here, because we had such a good build-up.
Yeah, well, this is where Nefertiti is really egging him on of, like, he wants to kill Nefertiti because she's kind of being a dick to him.
Oh, yeah,
He's like, she's like, you can kill me, but only when your blood is covered with or your sword's covered with his blood.
Yeah, no, it's a great line.
Also, like, it takes him so long to do this because they're already to the Red Sea.
Oh yeah, no, they like book it out of there.
Yeah, which also cool dynamic shots of Ramses on his chariot.
No, it looks so good.
I do have questions of if they stood the whole time to get out there.
So there's, again, this is where Cecil's research and like modern day research do conflict a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
Cecil's research at the time showed that he was under the impression that Egyptians were somewhat against actually riding the horse.
Mm-hmm.
It was his understanding that they preferred to either be drawn in a chariot or in a carriage of some kind. Chariot was the only thing he had as a reference, so he assumed chariot, and like also he had everyone dressed up for war, so like chariot. That makes the most sense. The distance between where A and B is, now we know, is a little bit far.
Yeah, they wouldn't have just taken their chariots.
No, probably not. But, again, Cecil's research and, like, the research that his team did for this, that's the answer that they came up with. I appreciate that there was some research done.
I do too.
And, like, it was accurate for the time, as best they knew.
Yeah. But now it's time to face Ramses, because there's more turmoil amidst the Jews who once again want to stone Moses, which
they're the whiniest of bitches.
Oh, it's amazing because they're just like, this dude got us out of Egypt. Let's stone him.
Okay, and I appreciate that Cecil's logic for leaning into this, where other stories lean away from this,
mm-hmm.
is that later on there is an interpretation technicality that Cecil uses to explain away some of the more fantastical aspects of the story. Mind you, like, there's a lot of fantasy in this story. But there is some very hard, like, stuff later on that
mm-hmm.
Cecil uses some technicalities and translation to, in his mind, that was how he understood and, like, interpreted it, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so he leans into the Hebrew nation being, honestly, kind of whiny bitches in this story, because it explains later what his understanding and reasoning of what his interpretation was.
Okay.
And I appreciate that, like, he came up with an answer. He did his research. This is the answer he came up with. And so he did more research. This was an aspect, granted, how much of an aspect is, again, up to interpretation and up to your own, and up to study. He decided that this was important. And so he leaned into it, and I appreciate that. Like, at least there's, like, an effort.
Exactly. And speaking of effort on this is the coolest shot of the movie.
So good.
I mean, the Pillar of Fire is kind of cool.
But it's dated. It's
the parting of the sea. And we have only 30 minutes left to this movie.
And honestly, like, from here on out, it's kind of whatever, because this sea parting scene is so cool.
Oh, yeah. I mean, even the Egyptian soldiers are recognizing his power.
This scene was done with a big-ass U-shaped tank in the back of the lot,
mm-hmm.
with around 360,000 gallons of water, and it's played in reverse. It was pouring in, and then they reversed the footage to show it coming out. And apparently this tank was so big that they just left it, and people used it as kind of a parking lot when it was done.
Mm-hmm. Well,
it was so cool.
Yeah, no, it's really, like, even knowing how it's done,
it still looks great.
Exactly. Yeah, I mean, granted, it's water, so the scaling of it doesn't always work that well, but
compared to so much else in this movie, though,
and
honestly, just other stuff from this time period, this looks great. I'm very happy with how this looks. Is it my favorite version of the Party of the Seas? No, that will always go to Prince of Egypt. That scene, the music, the whale shark thing, mind blowing. Absolutely. But this is a very cool, more adult, realistic version.
Even like the soldiers drowning is
it's so
shot
good.
well.
It's so good because it does have that weight, but it's shot in a very Cecil style where he shows part of the action, but not enough for it to be a problem. He either shows, like, the very beginning of the action of the death, or he shows the end consequences, if he can.
Yes. But Ramses returns alone, which I do have to say, I have held back. I thought about calling him Ramses from, like, Nacho Libre this whole goddamn time.
Oh, no, I understand.
Like, that movie's just ruined that. It's like, Ramses is the very best.
Yeah, no, that movie ruined the name Ramses.
Yes. But there's that line from Nefertiti in it, too. It's like, you couldn't even kill him.
Yeah, no, and the disappointment in her voice in it. Like, she was excited for Moses to be dead.
Oh, yeah.
No. Because that would have at least been revenge for her son. Exactly.
But finally we are on to Mount Sion, which Moses is already on the mountain at this point. He's been there 40 days and 40 nights, which is a real quick turnaround from, like, getting out of Egypt to this shit where Dathan's being just obnoxious.
The worst.
He's awful.
He's the worst.
Yeah.
But I love this scene because, like, this is another scene where Cecil had to tone it down for 1950s aesthetics, and he was like, we all know what's happening here. None of you are allowed to be naked, but I need a party. And people are like, oh, we need it to, like, we need it to be good. I don't want to ruin his shot. I don't want to take, and he's like, no, if y'all can't be crazy, I'm going to hire people who can be crazy. Yeah.
I'm trying to think of, some of the dancing on, like, the statue reminds me a little bit of, like, Metropolis.
A little bit. And it's that, like, wild, loose, just kind of interpretive dance style. There is some really good, like, background direction that Cecil gave, like having the one woman polishing the statue with her hair. There's a couple of scenes in the background of grapes and stomping and having that importance and allusion to wine and drinking without actually showing it for 1950s aesthetic and needs. Yeah. But, like, I appreciate that, like, he goes and shows you the luxury and the lavishness and the silly foolishness that the people are going through, but he keeps it toned to such an extent that, like, this movie was capable of being on air continuously for decades.
Yeah. Well, and on top of that, like, the effects on this part are cool.
It does. It looks good.
You can see the writing in the and the actual outline of the stone, but the way they went about it, filling it with gunpowder and lighting it on fire.
It looks so good.
Oh, it's so good.
It looks so good. And this is the scene that honestly has been redone and copied and also just parodied many times. I think Family Guy has, like, a, like, hilarious free interpretation of this.
Not doubt it.
Like, there is several reimaginings of this specific version of the scene. And I really appreciate that because, like, honestly, this is a really good scene. It looks good. It looks cool. I do like that Moses now has, like, the extra tired, sad look to him. And, like, he gets less and less lines as this movie goes on, which kind of adds to the tiredness.
And the way he comes back, it reminds me of, like, when your dad sent you to the basement to clean something, and then he comes down and it's you and your brother's just screwing around. He's like, what have you done, children?
I also love that he clearly was given the direction to have, like, this air of just having witnessed and heard God, so he has the faraway look, but also you can tell that this was, like, a slippery set, because every step is like a, yeah. But it adds to this, like, tiredness.
It almost feels like, I'm too old for this shit, guys.
No, that, from this point forward, that is Moses' attitude, and I love that Cecil kind of leaned into it a little.
Which is funny, because Moses is younger than Aaron. Or no, Moses is older than Aaron, because he's the firstborn.
He is.
But still, he's probably not that much older than Aaron.
Honestly, Aaron was much more excited to have, like, a prophet in the family, according to this movie, than Moses was not here. He was not excited anymore. He came down that mountain and he was like, what you fuckers doing?
Yeah, well, and I do find this scene a little bit comedic too, because it's just like, well, you left them down there, like, you could have given the commandments pretty quickly, but you had him wait 40 days and 40 nights, and then on top of that, when he gets down there, well, you disobeyed me. You don't deserve to even know the commandments now. And
just
boom.
Smashing him.
Yeah.
Which then he just has to hike back up and get him again.
No, not even, because they're... Well, first off, they kill a bunch of people because
That's
how
true.
dare you?
Well, yeah, no, there has to be more massacre because Old Testament.
Yeah, and they're sent into the desert for 40 years until all who witness the sin are purged from the group, which does, I mean...
Okay, so here is where Cecil's interpretation, it kind of bothers me, because there is a little picky and choosing that he did. the version of the Bible that he was, like, very faithfully trying to recreate does say 40 days and 40... It's either 40 days or 40 days or 40 years.
Okay.
Depending on which story you're talking about. The 40 is a recurring number. It is often called a holy number. It is something that we see several times throughout the version of the Bible. Cecil did background research and decided through his research, from what he could find, that word that got it translated and interpreted could have also meant many. However, he still has to say 40, because 40 is like the buzzword that people recognize, because it's 40 days, it's 40 nights, it's 40 years, 40 generations. Like, there is a lot of 40s in the Bible. So, 40 years is a long time, but Cecil also took it to mean many, and Cecil wanted it to be kind of clear to you that the people needed to be a new people so that they could be led by God.
Yeah, the descendants of the people who sinned, but the children were born free of it, basically.
And so I know that there's the little expert from Cecil, like, reading to kind of explain it. There was more that I think was meant to be understood about, like, a slavery mindset. And granted, this is coming from Cecil's understanding of the Bible and his history and research that he did. There was a desire to have people who do not remember or desire to go back to Egypt. This is a part that a lot of people, especially modern audiences, have a lot of gripes with. Most of Cecil's work on this goes fairly unchallenged. This is the one part where people are like, okay, this is the part where some bending and liberties was taken, because also, at this point in the Bible, because of that 40 number, either, according to Cecil, Moses is either now 80 or 120.
Yeah. I also think this movie's almost 4 hours long. We gotta wrap it up, guys.
No, we gotta wrap it up, because also this is not the end of the story. There's more, but this is the end of the Moses portion. Because Moses was fucking done with this shit.
Yeah, because this movie ends with Moses being like, he's put the 10 Commandments in the Ark of the Covenant. Yeah. Go and take that, and also take these books I have written.
And please leave me alone.
Well, he's like, Sephora's like, I'll come with you. No, it's my duty to go into the desert alone. It's like, that's such a shit reward of, like, good work, bro. Go die alone now.
Yeah, again, this is where we've run out of time, and also the research that he did and the version of the Bible that he was going for and the accuracy that he desired in this movie. This is the part for me that I have a bit of beef with, because this is not a good ending point, because this is not actually the end of the story, but this is where the Moses portion ends, and, like, this feels like a bad ending.
Because we want to climax the movie with the 10 Commandments.
And also, like, he wanted a story about Moses. I understand that. However, like, this is a bad ending for Moses, and also, like, the quick little Bible reading doesn't explain Moses' tiredness, how God said he was not allowed to enter the promised land. Like, it doesn't explain quite enough. There's a lot left on the audience to already know. Which for the rest of the movie, I think works, because you don't technically need it to get the story. You can watch it and enjoy it. This ending requires the audience to know a lot already. And granted, a lot of people do know this. This is a very popular story. This is one that most people do know. However, I would argue that Cecil was trying to make a movie that is not specifically for a Christian audience. He was looking for anyone to be able to watch this.
Yeah, just make a good movie, basically.
Exactly. And so I do wish that we've already been here this long. Spend 5 extra more minutes explaining to me why Moses is not allowed to leave the desert.
I mean,
explain to me why God is angry at Moses, because God was angry at him, according to the story that Cecil's going from. God is angry. Explain it to me very briefly. Cecil, please!
I don't even remember.
Moses was not excited. Moses was not a happy player. Moses was not a team player at the end of his very long life. And God was like, look, you've had some problems in the past. You've had some good times. I think you need to stay in the desert.
So Moses not only gets punished by the Pharaoh with life, he gets punished by God with life.
Yeah, no, the Old Testament God was brutal, man. Yeah.
Amazing.
Yeah, and, like, part of it was also, like, Moses was like, I'm done with these fucking people. Every time I turn around, they want to kill me.
Yeah. So, how come you don't like this last Moses?
Okay, so every version of Moses, up until this last physical representation of Moses, has been a good aging process of Moses. He looks like a young man. He looks like a man who has seen God but is still a young man. He does look like an older man.
Mm-hmm.
This version of Moses is, again, either supposed to be 80 or 140, depending on which version of the research you're watching. This looks like a 30-year-old man with some curly beards on. And even Cecil admitted that, like, this was not his favorite version. He did wish that there had been a little bit more time and effort put into the wig and the beard. The ringlets, now that he had, like, after he had finished watching it again on the big screen, he was like, yeah, now that I see it, the ringlets are a little bit Christmassy.
Okay.
The hands are very prominent because there's a lot of emphasis on, like, the staff and him holding it and, like, waving out across the people. They are the hands of a 30-year-old man.
Yeah.
Not an 80 to 140-year-old man.
Okay.
And so, like, that's my one gripe, because everything else in this movie looks phenomenal. And this is a very small detail that, like, does bring me out of the, like, trance of ancient Egypt, because everything else, the sets look great. The Technicolor looks amazing. Even the blue screening, for the most part, looks really good. This is the one thing that I'm like, okay, we spent so much time and effort on everyone else's costume. Every other moment that Moses is on screen, he looks phenomenal. The costuming is realistically done. We had people realistically weave his garments on historic ancient methods.
Yeah.
And we forgot about the hands. You know, like, it's a safety pin, but at the end of the movie.
Okay, I see it now. I wasn't paying attention. At that point, I'm just like, just end it already, guys.
This is the part of the movie that normally as a kid, I was, like, actually watching, because, like, I was in it for the magic. I had then eaten a ton of snacks while watching this part of the movie, and I no longer could get up to leave to stop watching this movie, because I'm committed now.
Okay.
So, like, this is the part I've watched the most, this is the part I remember the most, and now having done all this research and, like, really watched it with a studious eye and appreciated how much effort and work went into this movie, this is the one piece that does feel just a little sloppy.
Yes, and the one piece was the faith and friendship we found along the way.
Except for Moses, who honestly became a crotchety old man.
Yeah. But the Ten Commandments, like we mentioned, was DeMille's last film.
It was.
It was also his most successful, and it was the highest grossing film of 1956, which second most for the entire decade. Something I do have to say I'm not very familiar with many American movies from this year, other than, like, The Killing, which remind how old Stanley Kubrick is.
Oh, I know, right?
Stanley Kubrick this was like his third or fourth movie at that point.
Yes.
The re-edit of Godzilla came out, Invasion of the Body Snatchers, and just there's a bunch of other, like, bad sci-fi I'm familiar with.
And according to some sources, with inflation, this is one of the highest grossing films of all time. Granted, that's a little bit up in the air, because depending on which calculator you use, and, like, this is a movie that's a little hard to calculate, because, again, it's still airing, and, like, it does get re-released. Like, there are theaters that occasionally re-put it out. It's still on TV. It's been on TV since the 1970s and aired every year since. So, like, how much money in ads has it made? How much money in royalties has it made? It's a little hard to, like, calculate, but a lot of people, like, say, like, if you just look at, like, it as a whole, this is one of not only the most influential films of all time, but it made a lot of money.
Well, and I can see why. I mean, we're about a decade out of World War II, where we overcame tyranny, and we're about to enter an age of civil rights where...
Oh, are you kidding me? This was like the Lord of the Rings of the time period. People were very into historical dramas. Biblical dramas were also very popular. Egypt was an incredibly popular topic of the time, and it has some of the biggest names with one of the biggest directors of all time doing it. Like, this is their Lord of the Rings for the time period. And I get it. It's still good.
Yeah, I mean, runtime, it's slightly shorter, but...
It's a little long, but also the extended editions are a little long. So, like, maybe that's just the making of a really good movie, is I've got to suffer a little.
For an epic. For an
epic, I've got to suffer. Yeah. And honestly, like, I don't feel like a really good epic happens very often, so I'm okay with them being a little long.
And that's the thing, that's with me too, is like, I was gonna go into this, I mean, as open as I could.
Sure.
And I honestly was surprised with how well it's written, how well everything's done with it.
Yeah, it's a great movie.
Yeah. And I mean, there's just so much that it has going for it that, honestly, for a modern audience, it's worth going back at least watching once.
Oh yeah, and also, like, if you're into costuming, if you're into set design, if you're interested in, like, old cinematography, film techniques, or even just movie actors in general, this is a laundry list of very impressive repertoires. A lot of very impressive people worked on this. Cecil is an incredibly interesting man. I recommend you look more into him, because while we talked endlessly about him, we barely scratched the surface.
Yeah.
He had a very wide career and did a lot of very cool things.
Mm-hmm. And for the sake of our own audience, because we are at about the 2.5 hour mark ourselves,
we understand. Yes, this is a long one.
Chris, on our good, bad, weird scale, what do you rate this movie?
Oh, for me, this movie's just good. It has a nostalgia spot in my heart, I will admit. However, watching it again with a very, like, critical lens of a movie watcher, I enjoyed this phenomenally, and I will probably start rewatching it once a year again just for the nostalgia vibes.
Yeah, I'm definitely giving it the good. I mean, there is so much good about it, not just from its storytelling method, but it's also a compelling story in itself for the most part. I mean, rushes a little bit at the end, and there's some goofy moments, but we're also looking at a movie that's 70-ish years now,
at least.
Yeah, so I mean, it's amazing that it's lasted so long too,
and it still looks as good as it does. Granted, it's got a few rough patches, but like, for as old as it is, it still looks good.
And I also appreciate that they don't edit that stuff out now, where they easily could.
Oh yeah, no, like this could have been. This is a prime subject to be that like highlight remastered bullshit where they cut a bunch of stuff, they redo the sound, they redo the coloring, and I know it has had some touch-ups, but it has not had the work that a lot of these older movies got done to them. Some of them to a benefit, a lot of them to detriment.
It got like the Criterion treatment versus the Disney, what the fuck did you do to Cinderella?
Yeah, no. Exactly. It got the Criterion treatment. It has been done with some good. And also, like, if you get this on DVD, the commentary is actually very good. Granted, the gal does go on about some things that I don't care about. She also has a lot of backstories I don't care about. But she did know Cecil very well. She was very familiar with the actors and everyone who worked with it. She has a lot of very good stories to tell. Yeah,
there's a little bit of confirmation bias in some of
the... There's a lot of confirmation bias.
Historical bits she brings up, but
she's not a historian. Let's be clear with that. Like, she is there, she knew these people, she has a lot of anecdotal stories. If you like the history portion, there is a lot of very cool information.
She's a historian of this movie, though.
Exactly.
Let's be clear about that.
And while I didn't get to read her entire book, I did get to check it out of the library, and she does have some very cool behind-the-scenes facts and interviews in it that honestly are kind of worth it if you like this movie.
Yeah. So, Chris, do you recommend this movie?
Honestly, yeah. Is it really long? Of course it is. But, like, put it on like everyone else did, in the background while you eat a ton of food and hunt for some eggs.
Yeah, I don't know if I'm in I would recommend this. I think I would recommend it to a select group, but for film nerds, I'd say you should watch it at least once, if only for the effects and the costuming and all that.
And honestly, it really did set like a cornerstone for future Christian-based and historical-based dramas. This is, for a lot of people, the pinnacle of those movies. And you kind of have to see it to see why. Granted, it is 4 hours. But you can get through it. I believe in you.
Yeah. So, now it comes to the time of our show. The 3 Degrees of Takashi Miike. Already won, so...
Yeah, we're just playing for fun at this point. Yeah. I'm interested to see how you get to this one, because these are some very old people.
Okay. 3 Degrees to get to Miike. Has to be a movie connection. Can't use the same connection twice. As well, I will try to make it the plot or theme tie as much as I can. I could not find a good connection other than the making of the Katakuris, but that was a documentary and the movie and not the movie itself. And I mean, it's a movie about bringing family together through tragedies, but and this is a fail. I know.
Yeah, hooray! I had to go all the way back to the 1950s in the Christian category.
Yeah, the two that have broken the streak. Tomb Raider.
And
the 10 Commandments.
Yeah, to be honest though, again, you have already won, so next season, look forward to a whole month of Takashi Miike.
Yeah. But anyway, this has been the Good, the Bad, and the Weird podcast.
Thanks for listening.
Peace! Thank you for stopping by this here town of the good, the bad, and the weird.
We appreciate your listenership, and if you want more of our takes in your life, feel free to check us out on social media at The Good, the Bad, and the Weird Podcast, or TGTBTW for short. As well, if we missed a fact, your favorite part of a movie, or just have a suggestion and want to reach out and say howdy, feel free to email us at tgtbtwpodcast@gmail.com. And feel free to join our Discord at The Good, the Bad, and the Weird Podcast, where we talk about movies, just share random banter here and there. And always, check out our podcasters, streamers, or any other content creator we shout out in our episodes. We really appreciate it. And as always, thank you for listening. Peace.